Yet if anyone had looked closely, they would have found no humiliation on Newman's still flushed face. Instead, there was an almost helpless sense of relief, mixed with a dangerous fascination she could no longer deny. For years, she had walked a political tightrope, constantly terrified that someone would uncover her identity as a supe. At the same time, she had been forced to live beneath the shadows of Soldier Boy and Homelander. She was exhausted. But tonight, beside the strongest man on Earth, Newman had experienced a feeling she had almost forgotten existed. Safety. Perhaps, as long as she remained beneath the protection of this towering figure, neither she nor Zoe would ever need to live in fear again. Sir. Newman rested her face against Benjamin's chest, her voice quiet and hoarse. You're incredible. She meant every word. His strength and overwhelming presence had surpassed everything she had imagined. Being near him was frightening, yet strangely addictive. Benjamin leaned against the headboard and casually lit a cigar. After exhaling a thick cloud of smoke, he glanced down at her. Enough with the flattery. His expression turned cold again. Don't forget why you're here. Tomorrow's congressional hearing is the only thing that matters. I don't care what methods you use or how many favors you have to call in. You're going to clean up this mess for that useless son of mine. Newman immediately straightened and nodded. Don't worry, sir. I know exactly what to do. After everything that had happened, she was now bound to Soldier Boy and Homelander. Whether she liked it or not, their futures had become connected. If they rose, she would rise with them. If they fell, she would fall as well. Benjamin suddenly paused, the cigar held between his fingers. Oh, right. Newman. He lowered his gaze, his commanding tone leaving no room for negotiation. You may only be a convenient companion to me, but I'm generous enough not to care about your past. He reached out and lifted her chin, forcing her to meet his eyes. But I don't share. Newman froze. Benjamin's meaning was perfectly clear. No other man gets to remain involved with someone who belongs to me. You understand. Her entire body tensed. Contact that useless husband of yours. Separate from him immediately. I don't want to see the two of you connected again. In the past, Newman would have destroyed anyone who dared interfere with her family. But faced with Benjamin's absolute command, she hesitated for only a moment. Yes, sir. Her voice was soft but firm. I'll handle it immediately. From now on, I belong only to you. Hearing her promise, Benjamin finally smiled with satisfaction. The danger had passed. Newman's tense nerves gradually relaxed. As she looked at the man before her, the powerful emotions he had awakened began to rise again. Soon, the bedroom fell silent behind closed doors, and the two remained together until dawn. Zoe. Early the next morning, sunlight streamed through the enormous floor-to-ceiling windows and spilled across the disordered bedroom. Newman opened her eyes, utterly exhausted. The space beside her was already empty. There was not even a trace of warmth left on the sheets. Benjamin had departed as silently as he had arrived, without leaving so much as a goodbye. Her entire body ached as she forced herself upright. Glancing at the clock, she realized there was little time left before the congressional hearing. Leaning against the headboard, Newman unlocked her phone and scrolled through her contacts until her finger stopped over one name. Samir. Her husband. Zoe's father. For a brief moment, hesitation flickered in Newman's eyes. Then her expression hardened. This was a ruthless world. The only way to survive was to stand beside the strongest person alive. Taking a deep breath, she typed a message. Samir, I want a divorce. My lawyer will send the agreement later. She stared at the words for several seconds. Then she pressed send. No explanation. No apology. Newman placed the phone aside and covered her face with both hands. I'm sorry, Samir. Soldier Boy had broken through every defense she possessed. Now, whether by fear, desire, ambition, or necessity, she belonged to him. To protect herself. To protect Zoe. She had chosen power over love. I had no choice. Newman closed her eyes as a single tear slipped down her cheek. At the same time, on the highest floor of Vought Tower, morning sunlight poured through the vast glass walls of a luxurious penthouse. Homelander lay across the leather sofa, staring silently at the ceiling. He had remained there all night. A rare trace of confusion lingered in his blue eyes. The congressional hearing would begin soon. He understood perfectly well that after today's proceedings, he might lose his position as Vought's greatest superhero forever. Because of yesterday's speech, everything he had built could collapse. But none of that occupied his thoughts. Instead, his mind remained fixed on one person. Soldier Boy. Why hadn't Soldier Boy come to see him? Homelander ran a frustrated hand through his blonde hair. Yesterday, in the square, he had confronted those politicians in front of the entire world. He had stood his ground like an untouchable god of war. He had not retreated. He had not apologized. He had not shown weakness. Was that still not enough? Had he disappointed him again? The longer Homelander thought about it, the more agitated he became. A nameless anger steadily gathered inside his chest. Just then, Ashley burst into the penthouse, her heels striking rapidly against the floor as she clutched a tablet against her chest. It's up. It's finally up. Oh my god. Her face was bright red with excitement. She had been so thrilled that she had forgotten to knock. However, the instant she entered the living room, her shouting stopped. Homelander slowly turned his head toward her. Do people no longer knock before entering someone else's home? Oh god, I'm sorry. Ashley recoiled in panic, immediately covering her eyes as she stumbled backward. I didn't see anything. I'll come back later. Stay. Homelander's quiet voice echoed through the room. That single word froze Ashley where she stood. She turned around stiffly. You came in shouting? Homelander said, narrowing his eyes. What exactly is up? Ashley swallowed and forced herself to focus on the tablet. Her hands trembled uncontrollably. It's your approval rating, sir. She hurriedly raised the screen toward him, struggling to keep her attention on the report. Yet despite her best efforts, her gaze continued to drift. She simply could not control where she was looking. After all, the handsome and overwhelmingly powerful Homelander was standing right in front of her, completely exposed. Your approval rating, Ashley swallowed hard. It's risen by a full 35%. As she spoke, her gaze began to drift again. Keep going. Homelander slowly sat up. Don't stop. And don't look down there. Look at me, Ashley. Ashley flinched and immediately snapped her head up. The public loved your speech yesterday, especially white voters and women across every demographic. They think you said what they were too afraid to say themselves. Your approval rating didn't just avoid falling. It shattered the all-time record. Ashley waved the tablet in her hand, practically trembling with excitement. Your current approval rating has completely surpassed Soldier Boy's at his peak. It's the highest in history. You're officially the most popular superhero of all time. Silence. A deathly silence settled over the living room. The gloom in Homelander's eyes vanished instantly. He had surpassed Soldier Boy? He had reached an all-time high? Homelander had already declared that he no longer cared what the public thought. He had said that approval ratings meant nothing to him now. He was done being Vought's puppet. And yet, the moment he heard that his popularity had risen, he still felt a surge of satisfaction. That was simply how deeply contradictory Homelander was. Good. The corners of his mouth finally curled upward, the smile impossible to suppress. However, Ashley's next words immediately ruined his mood. Oh, right, Homelander. Ashley carefully glanced at her watch. You should get dressed. The congressional hearing is about to begin. The moment he heard the word hearing, the smile disappeared from Homelander's face. His eyes turned dark and gloomy once again. Right. No matter how much the public supported him, he still had to face that group of self-righteous, hypocritical politicians. There was still one final obstacle in his way. What if those politicians insisted on convicting him? Meanwhile, in Washington, D.C., the solemn and imposing Capitol building stood beneath the morning sky. The hearing chamber was packed. Rows of media cameras were aimed at Homelander, who sat at the center of the room. Countless politicians whispered among themselves, waiting eagerly to see the fallen god humiliate himself. Congresswoman Newman entered the chamber wearing a black turtleneck and high heels, her expression cold and composed. The turtleneck concealed the horrifying red marks Soldier Boy had left around her neck the previous night. Just 10 minutes earlier, she had signed the divorce papers with her husband, Samir, without the slightest hesitation. Samir had not understood her sudden decision, but Newman's forceful attitude had left him with no choice but to agree. Now, Newman had completely severed every path of retreat. She had only one master left. Thump, thump, thump. The judge struck the gavel, and the entire room fell silent. Every eye turned toward the woman presiding over the hearing, Congresswoman Newman. Everyone believed that this iron-fisted politician, who had dedicated herself to bringing down superheroes, would present the most devastating evidence possible and finally nail Homelander to the wall. Even Homelander, seated at the defendant's table, clenched his fists in irritation. But then, Newman approached the microphone and took a deep breath. The sharp, camera-ready tone she normally used when attacking Vought was nowhere to be heard. Members of Congress and friends from the media. Newman's clear voice echoed throughout the chamber. Regarding the accusations that Homelander is suspected of murder, we have conducted an extensive re-investigation. There is one fact I must clarify for the public. Newman suddenly raised her head and swept her gaze across the room. Homelander did nothing wrong. The chamber erupted instantly. Countless politicians stared at Newman with widened eyes, as though they were looking at a lunatic. They had already agreed on everything beforehand. This hearing was supposed to drag Homelander into the mud and destroy him for good. Even Homelander froze, disbelief written across his face. He knew perfectly well that Newman was Edgar's daughter. Because of that, shouldn't she hate both him and Soldier Boy? To be honest, Homelander had been so occupied lately that he had not done anything to Newman. He had not even threatened her. In his mind, Newman should have been leading the charge against him. He had originally planned to threaten her after the hearing was over. Ignoring the uproar below, Newman continued in a powerful voice. The two men killed by Homelander were violent criminals with multiple convictions. At the time, they were attempting to assault a defenseless pregnant woman in a dead-end alley. Homelander killed them to save 2 innocent lives. Newman's voice grew increasingly impassioned, filled with the inflammatory charisma that only an experienced politician could wield. By every reasonable standard, that was an act of justice. Are we seriously going to put a superhero who saved a pregnant woman on trial simply to protect the so-called human rights of 2 criminals? He deserves forgiveness. He deserves our praise. The entire chamber exploded into chaos. A huge portion of the public had already switched sides and begun supporting Homelander after his speech the previous day. And now, even Congresswoman Newman, one of the most prominent leaders of the opposition, had personally stepped forward to clear his name. The situation reversed in an instant. Under the overwhelming pressure of public opinion and Newman's political maneuvering behind the scenes, the hearing that had originally been intended to punish Homelander transformed into a ridiculous commendation ceremony. The judge wiped the cold sweat from his forehead and looked down at the spectators, who were cheering wildly. With a trembling hand, he raised the gavel. Thump. By unanimous decision of the committee, Homelander is acquitted. 20 minutes later, in the underground parking garage behind the Capitol building, Homelander strode through the dim corridor in his spotless supersuit. He did not know what to say. Not only had he escaped complete disgrace, but thanks to his speech and Newman's sudden defection, he had been elevated to a position no one else could possibly reach. It felt damn good. But now that the major problem had been resolved, it was time to deal with the smaller one. Sir. Ashley hurried toward him with small, rapid steps and respectfully handed him a phone. We found the person you were looking for. Homelander stopped. He took the phone and glanced down at the screen. Displayed there was a photograph of a man, accompanied by his home address and a detailed list of every known personal connection. Thomas. This reckless little ant was the one who had first uploaded the video online and attempted to smear Homelander's reputation.
Hey everyone, welcome to our channel, and thank you for your support. If there's a favorite novel on the channel and you want the next part, you're just one step away. Become a Patreon member and I can make it depending on your tier. Thank you for your attention.
Bastard had triggered every public relations disaster that followed. Homelander stared intensely at the face on the screen. Slowly, the corners of his mouth stretched into his perfect signature smile. Good work, Ashley. He casually crushed the phone in his hand, reducing it to a twisted lump of metal. Then his eyes began to glow with an unbearably bright crimson light. Without another word, he walked away. Ashley remained behind, staring heartbroken at what was left of her phone. Bang! The rusted metal door of the rundown apartment was kicked clean off its hinges by brute force. The whole slab slammed into the wall with a deafening crash. Homelander strode into the cramped, dingy rental, his eyes blazing with a terrifying crimson light and his whole body radiating cold, murderous intent. He was going to burn Thomas, that troublemaking piece of shit, to ash with his own hands, little by little. But the second he saw what was inside, the red glow in his eyes vanished. The air reeked of blood. The man named Thomas was indeed lying on the filthy single bed. But he could no longer be called a whole person. All four of his limbs were gone, the stumps mangled and raw, blood soaking more than half the mattress. Thomas's eyes had rolled back, and agonized rasping sounds clawed their way out of his throat. By now, he was only barely clinging to his last breath. Homelander froze for a second. Then, almost instinctively, he turned toward the worn-out single sofa in the corner. A tall man was sitting there. It was Benjamin. Benjamin was leaning back against the sofa. And Congresswoman Newman, the powerful political figure who had just cleared his name at the hearing, was right there with him. At that moment, she looked like the most obedient little ragdoll cat in the world. She sat sweetly in Benjamin's lap, pressed against his chest. Homelander opened his mouth. Faced with that shocking scene, his brilliant mind actually short-circuited for once. Dad, this is... Homelander pointed at the miserable limbless wreck on the bed and asked. That scumbag only knew how to hide behind a screen and run his mouth. Of course he deserved to die. Benjamin idly played with Newman's hair, shrugged, and spoke in a flat tone. At that, Homelander instantly understood. No wonder Newman, who had been biting down on him and refusing to let go, had suddenly flipped sides at the hearing. No wonder he had won. So while he had spent the whole night lost and confused, Soldier Boy had personally stepped in and tamed Newman himself. He had even found the real culprit first and gotten revenge for him ahead of time. A wave of emotions too tangled to name surged up inside Homelander. So this was what it felt like to have someone protect you. So this was what it felt like to have an all-powerful dad quietly clean up your mess from behind the scenes? Homelander was deeply moved. Still, he forced down the urge to let that emotion show on his face. Otherwise, what if after getting all touched, he got called a pathetic little pussy who would never amount to shit again? Seeing Homelander standing there in a daze, Newman, still curled up in Benjamin's arms, very sensibly lifted her head. She wore a perfect professional smile, polished and political. Mr. Homelander. Newman's voice was gentle and submissive. From now on, the Federal Bureau of Superhuman Affairs will be Mr. Soldier Boy's personal property. And of course, it will also be Vought International's most loyal ally. Homelander took a deep breath and nodded silently. Benjamin chuckled. His big hand casually slapped Newman's firm ass. All right, you're done here. Get your ass back to work. After receiving her master's order, Newman nodded again and again. Like a woman head over heels in love, she leaned in and planted a hard kiss on Benjamin's stub-bled cheek. Then she clicked away in her high heels, quickly leaving the apartment that stank of blood. Once the door closed, Homelander walked silently to the bedside. He looked down at Thomas, who had already slipped into a half-conscious state. Then he lifted his right foot, the one in the red combat boot. Splat. Like crushing a rotten tomato, he stomped Thomas's head into red and white pulp across the floor. 1. The room went completely quiet. Benjamin stood and walked over to Homelander. He reached out with his rough, broad hand and gave Homelander's wide shoulder a firm pat. Saving that pregnant woman and killing those two scumbags felt pretty damn good, didn't it? Homelander remembered the worshipful look the pregnant victim had given him. He nodded honestly. That's more like it. A faint curve of approval tugged at Benjamin's mouth. That shit you said in the square yesterday, tearing into those politicians? That was cool. Homelander snapped his head up, his blue eyes full of disbelief. He had actually gotten praise from Soldier Boy. He had not been called a pussy. This damn old man actually thought he had done something cool. Homelander was thrilled. In that moment, he was like a grade school kid who had finally gotten a perfect score and earned praise from his parent. But then he suddenly remembered Ashley's report from that morning. Homelander rubbed his hands together, a little guilty. He looked at Benjamin carefully, testing the waters. My approval rating, kind of accidentally passed yours today. Do you care? Homelander asked with barely any confidence. After all, Soldier Boy had once been an incredibly proud symbol of his era too. What if he did care? Hearing that question, Benjamin froze for a second. Then he could not help bursting into a bright, hearty laugh. Why the hell would I care about fake bullshit like that? Benjamin reached out and ruffled Homelander's perfectly styled blonde hair. Let me ask you something. What kind of father doesn't want his son to make something of himself? What kind of father doesn't want his son to completely surpass him? Benjamin looked at Homelander, his eyes full of approval. Or maybe pride. Homelander froze again. A warm current punched straight through the coldest corner of his heart. So Soldier Boy really did not give a damn about all that vanity. What he cared about was him. His son. Alright, quit standing around like a dumbass. I spent all night fucking Newman, and I'm starving. Benjamin slung an arm around Homelander's shoulders and pushed him toward the exit. Looks like the McDonald's nearby has some limited edition grilled pineapple burger or some shit. Come on. I'll take you to try it. Half an hour later. Inside a McDonald's on a busy Manhattan street. Every customer waiting to order or eating fries stared with their mouths hanging open. Some did not even notice their burgers slipping out of their hands and onto the table. Because two men in full supersuits were sitting openly by the window. Soldier Boy, Homelander, the father and son with the most terrifying combat power on the planet. At that moment, each of them was holding a grilled pineapple burger and taking huge bites, with several extra-large orders of fries spread out in front of them. Holy shit, am I dreaming? It's really them? Homelander, the guy who just got acquitted. They're seriously eating a McDonald's value meal. Oh my god. A wave of barely restrained gasps swept through the crowd. Soon, a few bold young people came over, trembling as they held up their phones. Excuse me, can we get a picture? Benjamin swallowed the beef patty in his mouth and waved casually. Yeah, take it. Make it quick. Homelander nodded too. He pulled up the corners of his mouth and gave them his signature smile. Click, click. Flashes went off one after another. For the next 20 minutes, people kept working up the nerve to come over for photos. The two of them cooperated and took every single picture. Homelander was beyond happy. He had always loved being worshipped. And maybe because he had killed those two scumbags, these people were worshipping him for real, like he was a god on high. A god? At that thought, Homelander suddenly realized something. What if he really became a god? What if he really became a god, and protected everyone? Two in just half an hour, videos and photos of the soup father and son sitting in McDonald's, eating burgers, went viral across every major short video platform. The likes shot past 10 million almost instantly. The comment sections blew up. Oh my god, they look so down to earth eating fries. I knew Homelander was being smeared by politicians. He's obviously so approachable. Soldier Boy is badass? Now that's a real hero for the people. A casual fast food run had, without either of them even realizing it, won this unbeatable father-son duo a flood of goodwill from ordinary Americans all across the country. However, Benjamin was frowning at Homelander, because Homelander was looking more and more excited. In his mind, he stood high above the world, looking down on it all, using his invincible power to protect every obedient subject beneath him. Everywhere he went, there would be oceans of people cheering for him. They would crawl at his feet, weeping fanatical tears as they cried out his name. Loved by everyone. Feared by everyone. Needed by everyone. At the thought, Homelander's pupils went slightly unfocused, and the corners of his mouth curled upward beyond his control. Hey! A rough, cold voice abruptly snapped him out of the daydream. Benjamin sat across from him, brow furrowed. What the fuck are you thinking about? Benjamin didn't bother hiding the disgust in his voice. Why the hell were you just staring at nothing with that gross, about to come look on your face? That was creepy as shit. Homelander snapped back to himself. Becoming a god, or whatever, probably wasn't something Benjamin would look kindly on. And given the current situation, becoming a god wasn't all that realistic anyway. His approval rating might have reached its peak, but Homelander was still just a superhero. He wasn't Jesus. But maybe, if he did enough good deeds, maybe, he could become a god? At the thought, the muscles in Homelander's cheeks twitched twice, almost nervously. And no, nothing. It just feels really good right now. Homelander shook his head. Then he lowered his gaze, reached out with his red-gloved hand, grabbed a handful of fries from the cardboard box beside him, stuffed them into his mouth, and chewed hard. The golden fries crunched between his teeth. Benjamin just frowned at his weird-ass son. He had no idea what Homelander had been thinking, but that expression just now, yeah, something had definitely been off. Forget it. Homelander had become a real superhero in the end. That was enough. But just then, a notification sounded beside Benjamin's ear. You made Homelander understand what true love is. Love is mutual. Only by loving others can one be loved in return. That is why, during this period, Homelander did the good things a superhero should do. He killed scum, protected the weak, and became a true superhero. 1. At the same time, his soaring approval rating has given Homelander a special idea. Although that idea is not exactly a good one, overall, Homelander has become a true superhero now, hasn't he? Reward obtained, super hearing LV5. 3. A not so good idea? What the hell could that be? Benjamin was very curious. Fortunately, he had gained the same super hearing as Homelander. Maybe he could use super hearing to tell whether other people were lying, too. He just had no idea when super speed and super flight would show up. Meanwhile, on the other side of the city, inside a basement that never saw daylight, there were no luxurious panoramic floor-to-ceiling windows like the ones in Vought Tower. Only moldy walls, and the sour stink of cheap tobacco and old beer that never seemed to leave the air. The boys' hideout looked like a rat hole, same as always. William Butcher stood beneath a dim incandescent bulb. The stubble on his face was a mess. His eyes were sunken and bloodshot, filled with a bone-deep exhaustion that looked like it could burn a man's soul down to ash. His time in Africa had been hell on earth. The torture, the blazing sun, the stench of rotting flesh and tropical disease had nearly broken him. He had barely managed to crawl back to America, covered in scars and carrying a rage that refused to die. He had thought he could finally land a killing blow on that star-spangled bastard. But now, all he could do was grip his phone tight, his face dark as he listened to the voice coming through the receiver. On the other end of the line was Susan Rayner, Deputy Director of the CIA. We failed, Butcher. Homelander won, and he won clean. Susan sounded like she had aged 10 years in a second, her voice heavy with the helplessness of someone who had been crushed flat by reality. Originally, according to our plan and basic common sense, we'd already had plenty of conversations with Newman. Victoria Newman was supposed to be our key card. She'd spent all this time building a public image as anti-supe. As long as she brought out that evidence against Vought at the hearing, we could nail that bastard. But Susan paused and took a deep breath. At the hearing, Newman changed her story at the last second. That fucking bitch flipped without any warning. In front of every senator and the media, she used the most polished, self-righteous bullshit imaginable to turn Homelander into an American hero. 1. Butcher clenched his jaw hard, unwilling to accept it. Listen, Butcher, you lost this one. Completely. There's no coming back from it. Susan started talking faster, impatience and helplessness bleeding into her voice. Take a step back and forget Newman flipping on us for a second. The incident itself still wasn't wrong. Those two guys Homelander killed in the street really were pieces of shit with records a mile long. That video proves one thing. If Homelander hadn't shown up like some goddamn savior, if he hadn't used heat vision to cut those two bastards in half, that pregnant woman they were holding hostage would have been dead. Susan took a deep breath, almost pleading with Butcher over the phone. So do you understand what I'm saying, Butcher? No matter how bloody it was, Homelander did a good thing. At least to the public, to everyone online, he saved an innocent mother and her unborn child. His approval rating is higher now than it's ever been. Butcher finally broke his silence, his voice hoarse and dripping with mockery. He blew two men's heads apart in broad daylight, brains all over the pavement, blood everywhere, and you're calling me to tell me that was a good thing. Butcher, you can't keep looking at everything through that hate-soaked, paranoid lens of yours. You have to look at it from the public's perspective. From the victim's perspective. Susan finally raised her voice, but it quickly sank back down in defeat. It's over. I can't help you anymore, Butcher. To get Homelander into that hearing, I already burned through every political favor and every bit of influence I had. I've got nothing left. Even the backup plans, the supervillains, all of it, we're out of options. Because the world needs superheroes, and it needs Homelander. A heavy sigh came through the phone. But, for old time's sake, I'll use the last authority I have to hide your team's families as well as I can and keep them safe. That's all I can do, Butcher. Take care. Beep, beep, beep. Susan didn't wait for Butcher to answer. She hung up. Butcher stayed exactly where he was, phone still pressed to his ear. That was right. This was supposed to be a perfect takedown. They had managed to force Homelander into the witness seat at the hearing not only because Thomas had released the video and stirred up public pressure. The official force Susan represented had pushed things along from behind the scenes, and that had been the deciding factor. Add to that Congresswoman Newman, whom they had thought was on the same side. This should have been a major victory, one that ripped off Vought International's hypocritical mask. Unfortunately, Newman had turned on them. Susan might not understand why Newman abandoned every political position she had at the last second and chose to stand with Homelander, but Butcher knew those high-level politicians all too well. It was either some trade of interests, or Newman had been threatened with something worse than death. But digging into the reason didn't matter anymore. It had already happened. It was done. Vought International's stock was climbing across the board, and Homelander's approval rating was still rising. And they, the people who wanted to kill Homelander and bring down Vought, had once again become rats hiding from the light. Butcher. A low male voice broke the deadlock. Mother's Milk and Frenchie had stopped whatever they were doing and come over to Butcher's side. Mother's Milk rubbed his face irritably, his big frame tense under the dim light. Frenchie kept fiddling with the lighter in his hand, the click-clack giving away the anxiety eating at him. What do we do now, boss? Frenchie looked up, his sunken eyes fixed on Butcher. At a time like this, if the CIA cuts us off completely, we won't just be out of weapons. We'll barely have a fucking place to hide. And remember, we're still criminals. Criminals who killed Translucent. Butcher slowly lowered the phone and tossed it onto the grease-stained table. He bowed his head, both hands braced against the table's edge, his broad back looking strangely hunched for once. A long while passed before Butcher raised his head again. His gaze swept over the two brothers in front of him, the two men who had followed him through life and death. I'm not continuing. His voice was quiet. What? Frenchie froze. Mother's Milk froze too, his eyes widening in disbelief. He stepped forward and stared hard at Butcher. What the fuck kind of joke is this? Butcher, after everything, you're telling us you're not continuing? After all the shit you went through, after everything you paid, now you're saying you're giving up. This fight can't go on, Mother's Milk. Even if we threw every last bit of ourselves into it, we wouldn't scratch one hair on that bastard's head. Butcher turned away, pulled a crumpled cigarette from the pocket of his battered leather jacket, and put it between his teeth without lighting it. But this shit show isn't your problem anymore. Butcher spoke slowly, his voice calm with the finality of a decision already made. I'm going to save Becca. Mother's Milk and Frenchie both fell silent. They knew what the name Becca meant to Butcher. She was the source of all his anger and obsession. She was also the last piece of humanity he had left in this rotten world. Once I get into that fucking secret base and get Becca out, I'm taking her and leaving America right away. We'll run. Use fake names. Get away from Vought, away from Homelander, and spend the rest of our lives somewhere he'll never find us. Butcher's eyes flickered in the dim light. In his heart, he silently added one more thing. Even if that meant taking Ryan with them. Just thinking about that boy who had inherited Homelander's genes made Butcher's chest ache. But he had already been there once. He knew that if he rejected Ryan, he would lose Becca forever. For Becca, he would give up all this hatred. For Becca, he would try to accept that little monster. Butcher had made up his mind. The cells inside Vought Tower. The upper levels of the tower represented everything Vought International wanted the outside world to see. But the cells were another world entirely. White corridors, white walls, harsh lights, and an atmosphere that made the skin crawl. At the far end of the corridor, the access light on the third-to-last cell changed from red to green. The pressure valve gave a low, muffled hiss, and the heavy alloy door slid open to both sides. Benjamin stood in the doorway, his body nearly filling the entire frame. He had just finished eating with Homelander when Starlight told him Kimiko was ready to submit. The corridor light shone in behind him, stretching his shadow long across the floor. That shadow reached all the way to the center of the cell, covering Kimiko's pale, curled-up bare feet. Kimiko raised her head, narrowed her eyes, and calmly watched the person in the doorway. Benjamin didn't step in right away. He shifted aside, revealing the slender figure behind him. Starlight. Kimiko's gaze stayed on Starlight's face for 2 seconds before moving away. Starlight's expression looked the same as always. Gentle, firm, without that kind of sincerity that made it hard to refuse. Then Benjamin walked in with Starlight. His leather boots struck the cell floor, each step ringing clearly and bringing a heavy pressure with it. Benjamin stopped in front of Kimiko, looked down at her, then tossed two things in front of her. A digital writing pad with a transparent screen. A stylus. Benjamin then asked, Starlight says you're ready to submit? Become one of us at Vought. That was right. Starlight had spent this entire time trying to persuade Kimiko, and somehow, Kimiko really seemed to have listened. Now Kimiko was going to become a superhero. Kimiko didn't answer right away. She lowered her head, glanced at the tablet, then looked back up at Starlight and Benjamin in turn. Her gaze stayed on Benjamin the longest. It was sharp, assessing, and full of hostility and distrust. In the end, Kimiko nodded. She reached out and picked up the stylus. The restraints limited how far she could move, but she could still reach the tablet. After writing the last word, she turned the tablet around to face Benjamin. A neat line of English appeared on the screen. I want to be a superhero who truly helps others. Benjamin looked at the sentence, and surprise flickered briefly in his eyes. Kimiko knew the words were not entirely a lie, but they were not entirely true either. A superhero who truly helped others. Those were Starlight's exact words to her, the way Starlight had described the heroes of the Seven. At the time, Kimiko had thought it was laughably naive. In this place, under this system, how could there possibly be a superhero who truly helped others? What Vought produced had never been heroes. They were products, commodities dressed up as heroes and carefully packaged for sale. She never would have agreed to this before. But then she heard about the changes Benjamin had fought to make. He had killed Edgar, the one behind it all, along with the others. Now the only people left inside the company were superheroes and administrators who genuinely intended to serve the public. Vought had become a real superhero company. Before she was locked in this cell, she had been part of the boys. She and her companions had spent all their time fighting Vought. Their bond had never been that deep, but at the very least, Kimiko knew the people in the boys were decent. Sure, that bearded asshole was always using her, but the others were all right. Especially the Frenchman. But Starlight had not given up. The blonde girl came to this cell again and again. Sometimes she brought food, sometimes medicine, and sometimes nothing at all. She would just sit in the corner and talk to Kimiko in a soft voice. Starlight talked about her own story, about what she had seen inside Vought, and about the changes Soldier Boy had made. At first, Kimiko refused to listen. She turned her face toward the wall, closed her eyes, and used silence to shut those words out. But Starlight did not stop just because Kimiko stayed silent. She kept talking. She came every time, her voice always gentle and steady. Starlight believed in Soldier Boy, even though Kimiko thought Soldier Boy was a bad person. In the end, Kimiko was swayed. Not because Starlight was especially good with words, but because Kimiko saw something in that girl's eyes. Conviction. Of course, the real reason Kimiko made her decision was Kenji, her younger brother. Her brother was being held by Vought in the prison next door. Kenji hated Vought and all supes. He had been brainwashed by Shining Light. That extreme anti-Vought, anti-supe ideology had sunk into his bones. She had no way to convince him, but she could protect him. That was the only thing she could do as his older sister. If she joined Vought, she could negotiate with Vought and trade her loyalty for Kenji's safety. If Vought refused to spare Kenji, which she knew was very possible, that was fine too. As long as she became one of Vought's superheroes, as long as she gained enough authority and freedom to act, she could find a way to get Kenji out herself. Once Kimiko truly made it into the 7, or even climbed higher than that, maybe she would not need Vought's permission at all. She would only need one chance. That was why she wrote those words. She wanted to become a superhero who truly helped others. Those words were meant for Benjamin, but they were also meant for herself. Maybe, in some distant future, Kimiko really could do that. And maybe Starlight's words were not all fantasy. Maybe changing Vought from the inside and turning it into a real superhero company truly was possible. But right now, Kimiko's first priority was protecting her family. That was the only thing she cared about. Benjamin stepped closer and bent down to unfasten the restraints around her wrists. Kimiko's hands were free. She moved her wrists a little. She looked up at Benjamin. The hostility in her eyes was still there, but it had softened a lot. Then Kimiko picked up the stylus and wrote another sentence on a new page. I want you to let my brother go. She held the tablet up, directly in front of Benjamin's face. Benjamin read it, then shrugged. I get how you feel, but that's not realistic. Your brother didn't choose to join Vought, Benjamin said slowly. And he doesn't want to be a normal person either. All he wants is to kill Vought supes. Shining Light got into his head, and you know that. Kimiko fell silent. Of course, she did not blame Kenji. She understood better than anyone where that hatred came from. She had once been the same way. Kimiko lowered her head, the tip of the stylus moving across the tablet. Then use your superpowers to take away his. This was the only compromise she could think of. If Kenji was no longer a supe, if his powers disappeared, then he would no longer be a threat to Vought, and Vought would have no reason to keep him locked up. Benjamin read the sentence and went quiet for a few seconds. Then he said, I can make his superpowers disappear. Kimiko's eyes lit up. But we can't let him go. The air froze again. Kimiko stared at Benjamin, her brows knitting together. What the fuck was the difference between saying that and saying nothing at all? Kimiko's lips moved. She badly wanted to curse, but she couldn't. For several seconds, Kimiko used silence to express her anger, her resentment, and how goddamn unhappy she was with this outcome. But there was nothing she could do to change it. Benjamin held all the cards, while she had next to nothing. All she could fight for was keeping Kenji alive, making sure he had a place to stay and food to eat, so he wouldn't end up living like some stray dog. She took a deep breath and forced down the helplessness rising in her chest. Then something occurred to her, and she kept writing. Once you trust me enough, I can keep my brother in line. She lifted the tablet. Benjamin read it and said, then I'll need to trust you first. Start as a second-tier supe. Second-tier supes were below the 7. They almost never got nationally televised autograph events, and they had none of that shiny, glamorous PR bullshit. Second-tier supes handled the hard jobs, the exhausting jobs, the dirty jobs, the kind of work the 7 wouldn't bother touching. Of course, it was even worse for third-tier supes. Third-tier supes were even lower on the food chain. Forget dirty work or hard labor. Generally speaking, all they could do was endorse some product, spend the entire day hawking it, and then hand most of the money over to Vought. Like that dog and that cat woman. Benjamin's judgment wasn't wrong. Kimiko was strong. Her self-healing ability was almost top-tier, and with the combat skills and tactical awareness she had honed since childhood, her overall strength would not lose out even inside the 7. But she came from the boys. She had been an enemy, a defector. No competent operator would put someone like that straight into the 7 and hand her a place at the company's core. Trust took time. Kimiko understood that. She set the stylus back beside the tablet and wrote nothing else. Her silence was also a kind of acceptance. Benjamin looked at her. A few seconds later, he turned and walked toward the cell door. Someone will come take you to register. Don't let me down. With that, he stepped out of the cell. Starlight left after him. She hesitated at the door for a moment, then looked back at Kimiko. The cell door closed again. Inside Vought as it was now, there was a somewhat vague hierarchy among supes. And standing at the very top of all supes, the only one in the first tier, was Benjamin himself. His title was Director of Supes at Vought. It sounded like nothing more than a high-ranking executive position, but inside Vought, he held the highest authority. He not only managed every superhero under Vought, he was also the true ruler of this vast empire. After checking on the little wolf girl Kimiko, Benjamin went to a meeting. Mr. Benjamin, these are the third quarter financial statements and merchandise sales data. The current CEO of Vought, Ashley Barrett, stood in front of the desk. Even though she wore an expensive business suit, she was painfully submissive in front of Benjamin. Beside her, Vice President Anika kept her head lowered. The same went for several other executives who had been promoted but had no real power. To the outside world, Ashley and Anika were formidable women in the business world, but they knew damn well they had to answer to Benjamin and Homelander. Leave them there, Benjamin said. Ashley looked like she had been pardoned. She quickly set the documents down and left Benjamin's office with Anika. Next came the second tier of the soup pyramid. That tier belonged to only one person, the current captain of the Seven, Homelander. He was Benjamin's bloodline. His son, John, also held the power of life and death inside the company. Other than Benjamin, no one in all of Vought dared say half a no to Homelander. When ordinary employees saw him walking down the hallway in his stars and stripes cape, there was admiration in their eyes, of course, but also fear. With father and son working together, they had completely cut off any possibility of overthrowing Vought. The third tier, naturally, was made up of the other members of the Seven. And under Benjamin's forceful push, Vought's fourth tier, the huge group of second-tier Class B soups, underwent a full military-style reorganization. Benjamin abandoned the old public relations approach and instead divided the second-tier soups into several major categories strictly according to compatibility and tactical role. First were combat-type soups. The selection criteria were brutal. They had to possess at least two of the following: super strength, super defense, or super self-healing. They also had to have some combat skill. According to the strength evaluation system, their overall combat power had to remain steadily between LV3 and LV4, second only to the monsters in the Seven. The little wolf girl, Kimiko, had terrifying self-healing and immense strength, so she naturally qualified. Of course, there was one other person who qualified too: Blind Spot. Blind Spot looked like nothing more than a gimmick meant to cater to political correctness and diversity. But Benjamin had personally reviewed his test data. Blind Spot's muscle density and explosive power had actually just barely reached LV4, and he was proficient in all kinds of lethal martial arts. Of course, if Blind Spot really only had sharp hearing, Ashley would not have been stupid enough to try bringing him in back then. Blind Spot going to the Seven was basically asking to get wrecked, but across Vought's entire registered superhero roster, ranking him in the upper middle range for actual combat ability was more than fair. Next came the second category, elemental soups. These people were like mobile artillery and special units on the battlefield. For example, Lamplighter, who could manipulate flames. He was timid by nature and had once been used by the boys, but when it came to suppressive fire, he was genuinely damn good. Lamplighter had originally been a member of the Seven, then later retired and went to Sage Grove Center to help Stormfront manage the place. Of course, at Benjamin's request, Sage Grove Center had temporarily halted its experiments. The soups inside had not been released, but at least they were no longer being tortured through experimentation. The main focus now was psychological evaluation. Soups with normal psychological states could return to society. Those who were not quite normal would remain locked up. Of course, Benjamin could also go there and erase their superpowers, but that would be something of a waste, especially since one of them had very powerful abilities. For now, Lamplighter was still helping manage Sage Grove Center. Once matters there were wrapped up, he could return to Vought. Of course, Benjamin was not sure whether Lamplighter was still in contact with the boys. Logically speaking, he probably was not. As for another representative figure, there was Ice Princess. Who was Ice Princess? Ice Princess had once fallen in love with a rather talented black rider. Their relationship had been extremely passionate for a time, until one night. They were in a penthouse apartment, getting intimate. Ice Princess became too emotional, and her superpowers went out of control. It was a terrifying kind of absolute zero. The poor black rider didn't even have time to scream. One part of his body froze solid in an instant. And, well, you know how that went. By the time Vought's medical team rushed over in the middle of the night, even the most advanced technology could do nothing about necrosis at the cellular level. Ironically, even though the Black Rider's love for Ice Princess had turned into hatred because he had lost his dignity as a man, leaving him in agony every day, deep down, he was still madly in love with her. Unfortunately, the world of soups was realistic and cruel. After losing that crucial part, the Black Rider had become a complete useless wreck in Ice Princess's eyes, and she kicked him aside without the slightest mercy. Next came the category Benjamin valued most: speedsters. In modern warfare, mobility often decides the course of a battle. Speedsters were generally weaker in super strength and super defense, but their strategic value was irreplaceable. Of course, among speedsters, A-Train's physical durability was unquestionably top tier. He was still extremely strong, and on land, A-Train would have no problem beating the deep. Benjamin had personally selected and trained 3 speedsters: Rena, codename Windrunner; Jack, codename Express; and David, codename Runner. Not long ago, during an air disaster over the Atlantic, Jack, Express, had played a crucial role. He carried the deep on his back and raced to a stretch of coastline along the Atlantic. Then, before the plane went down, he forced his way to the crash area and delivered the deep there in time. The deep then summoned a pod of dolphins to hold up the doomed passenger plane. After the incident was over, the one who had carried Benjamin to the scene earlier had been Rena, Windrunner. Rena had beautiful, waist-length silvery white hair that flowed like a waterfall. Her features were delicate and stunning, and her figure was nearly perfect, with a full, eye-catching chest, an astonishingly firm, curved ass, and long, shapely legs made strong and supple from years of running. Back then, she had taken Benjamin to the Atlantic, serving as his mount. So that mount relationship naturally found its way into the bedroom. Benjamin had not expected that, in this rotten superhero circle, this alluring speedster had still kept her most precious first time. That night, there was no clash of superpowers, only the most primal conquest. From then on, Windrunner Rena was not just his subordinate. She was also his loyal mount. 1. Earlier, Rena, David, and Jack had also been the speedster supes who carried Starlight, Maeve, and the Deep on their backs to help Soldier Boy and the Homelander. Of course, it did not do much good. At the time, the Homelander had actually been rather touched. In the eyes of Vought's old pack of idiot executives, speedsters were nothing more than racehorses used to sell sneakers and shoot energy drink commercials. To Benjamin, that mindset was unbelievably stupid. He valued Windrunner, Express, and Racer very highly. Granted, in terms of raw speed, the three of them could probably only just squeeze into the global top 10. Compared with the widely recognized top 3, or even the number 1, A-Train, there was indeed a slight gap in their 100-meter sprint data. But so what? When a speedster could silently airdrop heavy combat power, or something like a bomb, straight into an enemy headquarters at supersonic speed, that tiny difference in speed meant almost nothing at the tactical level. On top of that, Benjamin had assigned them a leader, Shockwave. As a top-tier speedster who had once competed with A-Train on the track for the title of World's Fastest Man, Shockwave had ultimately failed to make it into the 7, but his current position was extremely special. Benjamin had personally stepped in and promoted him to Commander-in-Chief of the Speed Tactics Brigade, giving him a status somewhere between the 7 and the massive ranks of second-tier supes. Shockwave was deeply grateful for this recognition. In the past, he had been nothing more than a pacesetter used by the PR department to provoke A-Train. But now, he was the captain of the speedsters, with real authority in his hands. Naturally, that power made Shockwave very happy. It even left A-Train a little pissed off. But there was nothing he could do. A-Train could not exactly give up his place in the 7 just to go lead the speedster supes, could he? Of course, given the choice, he would have wanted both. He would have loved to remain a member of the 7 while also leading the speedster supes. But everyone knew A-Train's heart was already having problems. Even A-Train himself did not know whether he would still be able to run in the future. But he was not willing to give up his place in the 7, so all he could do was keep hiding it and get through one day at a time. Soon, after finishing his company business, especially after approving the document assigning Kimiko, codename the Female, to the second-line combat-type supes, Benjamin left his office. 3. Before long, he arrived at a luxury apartment building. This was Windrunner Rena's private residence. With a soft click, the fingerprint lock recognized Benjamin, and the apartment door slowly opened. "Sir, you're here." Hearing movement in the entryway, Rena appeared in front of Benjamin almost like a streak of silvery white wind. She was a speedster, after all. Rena was very fast. Her blue eyes shone with undisguised fervor and devotion. The moment Rena saw Benjamin, she knew exactly why he had come to her. Soon, the tight silvery white supersuit slid off her body like a shed skin. She was obedient to the extreme, even a little eager to please, like a docile white Persian cat. Bare and flawless, she gently wrapped her arms around the man who controlled both her body and her fate. 2 hours later, on the luxurious French-style bed, the rumpled genuine leather sheets were thick with the scent of sweat. Bare-chested, Benjamin leaned against the soft velvet pillows. He lit a cigar, his deep gaze passing through the curling smoke as if he were calculating something. Windrunner Rena lay lazily across Benjamin's broad, solid chest. Her perfect, delicate body still carried the flush of intense exertion, rising and falling softly with her breathing. Benjamin held the cigar in one hand, while the other idly toyed with Rena's long, waterfall-smooth silvery white hair, his fingers occasionally brushing over her smooth back. "Rena." Benjamin blew out a ring of smoke. His deep, magnetic voice sounded in the quiet bedroom. "Get ready. In a bit, you're carrying me to Los Angeles." 1. At those words, Rena's hazy eyes instantly lit up, and her fatigue vanished. "Yes, sir." She tilted her head up slightly and asked with curiosity, "What are we going to Los Angeles for?" At that moment, Rena's mind had already started racing with uncontrollable fantasies. Los Angeles? That meant sunshine, beaches, and Hollywood. Could it be that after all this high-pressure work, Sir was planning to take a vacation, and bring her along for a sweet private getaway? At the thought, Rena's heart fluttered wildly, brimming with anticipation. She started mentally picking out a bikini for a stroll along Santa Monica Beach. Then she imagined herself holding Benjamin's arm, leaving romantic footprints beside the palm trees in the sunset. In fact, aside from Stormfront and Newman, Starlight had fantasized about that too. Unfortunately, Benjamin never talked about love or romance. "We're not going on vacation. We're going to find Marathon." Marathon. Rena paused, but as someone from the speedster circle, she quickly remembered the hero code name. He was a veteran second-tier speedster supe. But a long time ago, he had been anything but second-tier. Marathon had once been the very first speedster in the 7. Back then, Marathon had been at the height of his glory, soaking up the world's spotlight and the screams of countless young women. But the turnover among supes and the brutal rules of competition had no mercy. As he aged, Marathon's speed began to slip by the tiniest margin. And that drop of just a few tenths of a second was enough for the then red-hot rookie A-Train to crush him completely. In a cutthroat corporate machine like Vought, losing the shine of being number 1 meant losing commercial value. Marathon was kicked out of the 7 without a shred of mercy, tossed aside like an expired product. Unable to handle that fall from grace, Marathon never recovered. He started living like he had given up on himself. Drinking, drugs, and every kind of self-destructive bullshit. Before Soldier Boy took power, second-tier supes were basically no different from third-tier supes. They had no real standing inside VOT, and only the 7 had truly made it. So it was no surprise Marathon ended up like that. In the end, Marathon left VOT completely, fled New York, and became a washed-up, forgotten supe in Los Angeles. Rena looked at Benjamin in confusion. She did not understand why someone like Sir, a man with enormous power and absolute control over VOT, would suddenly be interested in some old guy VOT had already thrown out. Go put on your supersuit, Rena. Benjamin patted her full, firm backside, signaling for her to get up. Rena nodded obediently and put on her supersuit. To be honest, Rena really was stunning in it. The silver supersuit, her long white hair, and her fair skin came together into something sleek, sharp, and beautiful. If Edgar's reign had not kept second-tier speedsters from getting any real exposure, Rena might have been even more popular than Starlight. Before long, Rena arrived in Los Angeles with Benjamin on her back. As they entered the city, a vague melancholy stirred in Benjamin's heart. The streets of Los Angeles, the palm trees, the gray-blue coastline in the distance. Everything felt deeply familiar. To be honest, aside from New York, where he spent every day now, Los Angeles was the city he knew best. No, that was not right. It should be called Los Santos. 2. At their destination, Rena set Benjamin down and casually straightened the collar the wind had ruffled. Benjamin said nothing. He simply looked toward the distant skyline and stayed silent for a moment. After that, they arrived at Marathon's villa. It was called a villa, but it looked more like a small estate. The place was finely decorated, with neatly trimmed ivy climbing the outer walls and warm-toned paving stones laid out in front of the entrance. It was obvious the owner had put real effort into maintaining it. Benjamin raised an eyebrow. This was not quite what the rumors had led him to expect. Everyone said Marathon had fallen on hard times, but from the look of it, his home was not exactly shabby. Before Benjamin could press the doorbell, the door opened from the inside. Marathon practically ran out. He wore a printed shirt, his face full of excitement, his eyes shining. Well, let me take a look at who's here. Isn't this Soldier Boy? Marathon's voice trembled slightly with excitement as he hurried forward, clasping his hands in front of him like a little boy finally meeting his idol. It's an honor, sir. Honestly, when I lost my virginity, I was wearing underwear with your face on it. 1. His tone was open and matter-of-fact, without the slightest hint that he was joking. Apparently, the admiration was real. Marathon was the kind of fan who had truly worshipped him for years. Of course, the part about his face being printed on Marathon's underwear nearly made Benjamin lose his composure. Marathon, everyone out there says you've been living pretty rough. As Benjamin spoke, he stepped into the villa, his gaze slowly sweeping over the interior. Dark solid wood furniture, several vintage movie posters on the walls, and a liquor cabinet stocked with plenty of whiskey that looked expensive as hell. Didn't expect rough to look like this. Marathon followed behind him. Hearing that, he rubbed his hands together a little awkwardly and laughed. Ahem, well, sure. Compared to regular people, I'm still living pretty damn well. When people say I've fallen off, they mean compared to what I used to have. I had my glory days, after all. I may be past my prime, but I'm still doing better than most. As he spoke, his gaze quickly shifted to Rena standing beside Benjamin, and his expression grew even warmer. Is that Rena? They were both speedster supes. Of course they knew each other. Rena nodded slightly, her voice calm but carrying just the right amount of respect. It's an honor to meet you, Marathon. You're my veteran. That one sentence made Marathon incredibly happy. The smile on his face deepened into creases, and he waved his hands again and again. No, I wouldn't dare. But no matter what he said, he could not keep the corners of his mouth down. After all, being called a veteran carried a certain prestige. He busied himself ushering the two of them to sit, then personally opened a fine bottle from his private collection, poured 3 glasses, and brought them over. Just as the atmosphere grew warm and easy, Marathon finally could not hold back the question in his heart. Soldier Boy, Rena, what brings you here? You didn't come all the way to Los Angeles just to visit an old has-been like me, did you? He asked carefully, testing the waters. Because Marathon really had no idea what they were doing here. Benjamin did not answer right away. Instead, he lifted his glass, took a sip, and asked, You used to be a member of the 7. Yes, sir. Marathon quickly composed himself. When the 7 came up, his expression turned complicated, carrying both pride and bitterness. Later, Homelander had A-Train replace me. As he said it, a trace of resentment slipped into his voice. After all, that had been the peak of his career. Being yanked down and replaced like that would leave a bad taste in anyone's mouth. That was why Marathon hated Homelander. Of course, Homelander had not actually done anything wrong. As a speedster supe, staying at the top and remaining in the 7 meant you had to be the fastest. Someone who was not the fastest man in the world had no right to be the 7 speedster supe. So in a sense, competition among speedster supes really was fierce. Whether it was A-Train replacing Marathon, or Shockwave almost replacing A-Train, Benjamin had come here precisely to prevent that. Mr. Marathon quickly pulled himself together, putting a smile back on his face as he cautiously glanced at Benjamin. After all, who didn't know Homelander was Soldier Boy's son? And Soldier Boy cared about him. A lot. By now, Mr. Marathon understood exactly what kind of relationship those two had, so there was no way in hell he was going to say a single bad word about Homelander in front of Benjamin. Some things could be thought, but not said. Forget all that old crap. Mr. Marathon quickly changed the subject, rising with renewed enthusiasm and waving the two of them toward the wall on the other side. Come take a look at what I've done over the years. I've made a hell of a lot of movies. I don't show up on the big screen much these days, but back then? Not to brag, but those films were a pretty damn big deal for a while. The wall was covered in movie posters, all starring Mr. Marathon, from his earliest black and white films to his later color action movies. They were arranged in neat rows, like a carefully curated museum of his own personal history. Standing in front of the posters, Mr. Marathon walked Benjamin through each movie like he was showing off priceless family heirlooms, talking about how he had done his own stunts back in the day, how he would fight with the director and then end up drinking with him afterward, and how hard he had pushed himself when he was young. Benjamin listened with a glass in hand, nodding now and then. He honestly didn't care much about Mr. Marathon's old movies, but since Mr. Marathon was such a huge fan of his, Benjamin was willing to sit there quietly and let him reminisce. But just as Mr. Marathon was getting carried away, waving his arms around while describing the details of an explosion scene, heavy footsteps came from the direction of the stairs. Very heavy. A figure slowly came up from downstairs, his shadow falling across the living room floor before he appeared. The moment he reached the top of the stairs and stepped into the light, the atmosphere in the room changed. That's right. It was Bombsight. He wore a dark jacket, and his hair was much shorter than it had been back then, but his eyes hadn't changed. They were still sharp as ever. He had originally come to buy something from Mr. Marathon. He was a regular here, dropping by every so often, and Mr. Marathon was used to having him over. He just never expected to walk into this today. Bombsight stopped in his tracks. His gaze landed on Benjamin, and his pupils shrank. Ben. Well, I'll be damned. Bombsight spoke slowly, irritation clear in his voice. He stood at the top of the stairs, staring hard at Benjamin, a mess of complicated emotions churning in his eyes. Bombsight envied Benjamin. He had envied him for many, many years. He envied that stupidly handsome face, envied all the beautiful women who threw themselves at him, even envied that natural presence he seemed to be born with. The guy was clearly just a fake soldier, yet somehow he stole all the spotlight. And right now, Benjamin was lounging on the sofa, fine wine at his side, with a gorgeous woman next to him. Rena's cool, striking face and perfect figure fell into Bombsight's eyes. That only pissed Bombsight off more. Bombsight was starting to lose it. Mr. Marathon stood between them, staring blankly from one man to the other. Honestly, he had no idea what the hell was going on. Wasn't Bombsight one of Benjamin's old teammates? By all rights, they should have been comrades, right? But this tense, hair-trigger standoff didn't look anything like old friends meeting again. It looked more like enemies coming face to face. The next second, Bombsight moved. In an instant, he lunged forward, launching himself through the air at Benjamin. He wrapped both arms tightly around Benjamin's waist and, using the momentum, slammed him to the floor, sofa, and all. Boom! A deafening crash tore through the villa, followed immediately by the sharp screech of shattering glass. The coffee table was knocked aside, sending wine glasses, bottles, and a fruit platter flying. Liquor and shards of glass splattered all over the floor. The two men rolled and grappled across the floor, knocking over the floor lamp beside them. It hit the wooden floor with a heavy thud, and the bulb shattered. Then Bombsight slammed hard into the display cabinet full of liquor bottles. The entire cabinet rocked violently, and bottles began tumbling down one after another, exploding across the floor. Whiskey and red wine mixed into a dark pool over the wood, and the thick smell of alcohol filled the room in an instant. Benjamin soon blocked Bombsight's falling fist with one hand. With the other, he grabbed Bombsight by the back of the neck and threw him over with raw force. Bombsight's back slammed hard into a chair. The legs snapped with a crack, spraying wood chips everywhere. But he rushed in again, his fist cutting through the air as it came straight for Benjamin's face. In truth, Bombsight wasn't attacking him because of some deep, bitter grudge, and it wasn't because some old or new feud had finally boiled over. The reason was simple. He just couldn't fucking stand Soldier Boy, and whenever the two of them met, there was almost a 50-50 chance they would end up fighting. It had been that way from the past to now, again and again, for 80 years. Mr. Marathon stood in the middle of the wreckage, clutching his head with both hands. He watched, heartbroken, as his beloved furniture was smashed to pieces one item after another, as the fine wine he had treasured for years burst open bottle by bottle on the floor, as the movie posters he was so proud of were stained beyond recognition by splattered alcohol. Stop fighting? Jesus, stop it, both of you. Mr. Marathon shouted in a panic. Rena took a few steps back and stood in a relatively safe spot, just as shocked. But she had no intention of stepping in. At least for now, Benjamin wasn't losing. If anything, he had the upper hand. Then came another thunderous crash as Benjamin drove a heavy punch into Bombsight's chest. Pain hit Bombsight almost instantly. His entire body flew backward, smashing through the partition wall between the living room and the hallway. In the cloud of dust, Bombsight staggered up from the debris, wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth, and shock flickered in his eyes. Ben, you got stronger again. Bombsight panted, muttering to himself. Benjamin stood where he was, straightened his rumpled collar, and worked his jaw. He looked at Bombsight, the corner of his mouth slowly curving up. No, you're just too fucking weak, Robbie. Always have been a piece of shit. To begin with, Bombsight had always been a little weaker than Benjamin in raw strength. On top of that, Bombsight could fly. Setting aside his nuclear blast ability, his overall strength was roughly on par with Benjamin's. But Benjamin's abilities had been strengthened several times by now. Aside from flight, he outclassed Bombsight in every way. Bombsight's smile disappeared. Then he charged in again. Mr. Marathon let out a despairing groan and closed his eyes. He couldn't bring himself to look at the rest of his furniture. Those were his assets, damn it. Unfortunately, it didn't last. Bang. Soon, Bombsight was slammed hard into the cracked marble floor by Soldier Boy. At this point, he had lost count of how many times he had been knocked down. Without LV6 level absolute strength and freakish defense, what the hell was Bombsight supposed to use against Benjamin in a fist fight? Against that kind of overwhelming physical advantage, he was nothing. Benjamin stepped forward without expression, reached out, and clamped a hand around Bombsight's throat, lifting him clean off the ground as if he weighed nothing. The feeling of suffocation rushed straight to Bombsight's head. His legs kicked weakly in midair while both hands clawed desperately at Benjamin's iron-hard fingers. If Benjamin squeezed just a little harder, Bombsight's neck would snap on the spot. Stop, Ben, please. Raw survival instinct kicked in. Bombsight kept begging for mercy. Before long, Benjamin let him go. They had been fighting for a long time, but at the end of the day, they had still been comrades from the very beginning. Thud. Bombsight crashed heavily into the corner of the wall. He coughed violently and took a long while to catch his breath. Only then did Benjamin let him off for the moment. He rolled his neck, his eyes still locked tightly on Bombsight. Not far away, Mr. Marathon finally relaxed a little when he saw the two of them stop fighting. Still, Mr. Marathon felt nothing but despair. As a washed-up soup, Mr. Marathon didn't have much money to begin with. This villa had cost him a fortune to renovate, and now it was half ruins. But more than anything, Mr. Marathon was grateful the two of them had stopped fighting. Otherwise, the whole damn villa would have been destroyed. Honestly, aside from the heartbreak, what Mr. Marathon felt most right now was shock. Had Soldier Boy really become this terrifyingly strong? As a member of the first generation, Mr. Marathon knew exactly how powerful Bombsight was. Back in the day, even if Benjamin had tried to beat someone on Bombsight's level into this half-dead state with raw physical strength alone, it would have been impossible. But now, this wasn't a fight at all. It was a one-sided beatdown. The destructive power Benjamin showed with every move, and that bottomless pressure radiating from him, left Mr. Marathon utterly stunned. Soon, Bombsight staggered to his feet, bracing himself against the broken wall. His once stylish jacket was now in tatters, and his face was smeared with blood and dust. Bombsight looked up at Benjamin, his eyes full of shock. Then, Bombsight's voice came out hoarse. How the hell did you do that? Your strength now, you're not just a little stronger than before. This makes no damn sense. As the one who had taken the hits himself, he felt it far more clearly than Mr. Marathon. When Benjamin's fist slammed into him just now, Bombsight had felt a terrifying amount of force. A boost on that level, had he taken V1? But wasn't there only one V1? And hadn't Bombsight already gotten it? All right, wipe that dumb, clueless look off your face. I don't have time to listen to you run your mouth. Benjamin cut him off coldly, then glanced at Bombsight and said, hand over the V1. His tone was calm, but it carried the weight of an order that allowed no argument. Benjamin was actually pleasantly surprised. He had originally come here looking for Mr. Marathon. He hadn't expected Bombsight to just happen to be visiting the villa today. Since Bombsight had delivered himself right to his door, he might as well take that thing while he was at it. The instant Bombsight heard the word V1, his pupils tightened. But he covered it quickly, immediately putting on a confused look as he frowned and shook his head. I don't know what you're talking about, Ben. What V1? Wasn't that already destroyed? Benjamin was certain that at this point in time, Bombsight already had V1. All the V1 had been destroyed long ago, and Bombsight had found the final dose in that laboratory. Robbie. Benjamin's voice suddenly dropped. He slowly started walking, closing in on Bombsight step by step. My patience has limits. If you don't hand it over, I'll smash your fucking head open with my bare hands right now. And I promise you, this time I won't listen to a single word when you start begging. Struggle immediately crossed Bombsight's face. He clenched his jaw. He had no idea what goddamn channel Benjamin had used to find out V1 was in his hands. That serum was meant for his lover. And now Benjamin expected him to just hand it over? Not a chance. I don't have that thing. Bombsight refused to admit it. Even if you kill me, I can't give you something I don't have. As Benjamin drew closer and closer, Bombsight didn't choose to resist. Instead, he suddenly spun around, gathered every bit of strength he had, and slammed himself hard into the thick load-bearing wall behind him. Mr. Marathon froze. Again? Bricks and stone exploded outward, dust billowing into the air. A massive human-shaped hole was punched straight through the villa wall. Bombsight rushed out without hesitation, planning to run. But Benjamin didn't chase him. If you want to spend the rest of your life with that little starlet of yours, I suggest you stop right there and respectfully place the V1 in my hand. Benjamin's voice wasn't loud, but Bombsight could hear him. Bombsight had already rushed out into the villa garden and was about to fly away when he froze in midair. A few seconds later, Bombsight returned to the ground. Then he slowly turned around, staring hard at Benjamin in the ruins. Ben, what the hell do you mean? What did you do to her? Bombsight's voice was tense. Relax. I didn't do a damn thing. Benjamin gave a contemptuous snort and slowly walked to the edge of the hole, looking out at Bombsight. Don't lump me in with some low-rent scumbag. I'm just stating a fact. He looked at Bombsight, his eyes full of mockery. You want to inject V1 into that little starlet at Vought, right? You want her to get a V1 physique too, so the two of you can fly off together and stay together forever. Very romantic script. Hell, Vought could turn it into one of their shitty third-rate romance movies. But too bad, Robbie. That aging little starlet of yours doesn't want some unknown crap injected into her, does she? She doesn't want to live forever. So all you can do is hide V1 away like it's your precious little treasure. And in the end, guess what happens? You'll watch her get older day by day. Her skin will sag, wrinkles will cover her face, and eventually she'll be lying in a hospital bed, taking her last breath. And you, because of the compound V in your body, will still be stuck with that young-looking shell. You'll have to watch her grow old and die, then keep living in this world alone for decades, maybe even centuries, like some pathetic stray dog. 500 years from now, after 500 years have passed, what the hell will you have left? 2. In fact, Benjamin had never had any way to contact Bombsight before. The guy had gone missing a long time ago. Running into him today at Mr. Marathon's villa was pure dumb luck. Since Benjamin had stumbled onto him, there was no way he was letting a chance like this slip by. As for kidnapping that defenseless golden geisha, then using her as bait to threaten him and draw Bombsight out, Benjamin had no interest in stooping to that kind of low-life shit. If he wanted something, he would ask for it straight. Bombsight fell silent. It was true. What he feared most was losing her. What he feared most was the loneliness of watching the woman he loved grow old while he could do nothing about it. Unfortunately, the golden geisha really would not take the V1 injection. And Bombsight respected her choice. Still, Bombsight argued back. What the hell do you know? I'll convince her to take it. His voice was loud, but there was no real confidence behind it. Because he knew. Benjamin was right. Once the golden geisha made up her mind, she would not change it, and he had no way to force the injection on her. Before long, Benjamin gave a quiet laugh and said, how about we split the difference? I use my superpowers to destroy the V1 in your bloodstream, and you give me that vial of V1. That way, you get to grow old with your golden geisha. I'm right, aren't I? Bombsight was silent for a moment. His expression barely changed, but his eyes gave him away. A flicker of struggle passed through them. Thinking about it carefully, it actually did not sound bad. After all these years, he had long since gotten sick of living. Bombsight had extraordinary speed, a nearly undying body, and power that made countless people fear him. But none of it had made him feel fulfilled. To put it plainly, he was tired of being alive. The only thing that changed that was the golden geisha. If one day the golden geisha really did die of old age, with no V1 and no immortality, then what was the point of him living on alone in this world? The ridiculous thing was, precisely because V1 existed, he did not even have the right to end that suffering himself. Immortality. What a ironic word. Of course, Bombsight could also let Benjamin beat him to death. But being beaten to death by someone else and dying of old age were two completely different things. So when Benjamin proposed this compromise, deep down, Bombsight actually felt a sense of relief he had not felt in a very long time. Maybe this was the best choice. Why are you helping me? Bombsight asked. The second the words left his mouth, he realized it might have been a stupid question. So he did not wait for Benjamin's answer. He simply waved a hand. Give me a minute. I'll be right back, Ben. Bombsight's tone had softened a little. As soon as he finished speaking, his entire body turned into a blurred afterimage and shot into the sky. In the blink of an eye, he vanished beyond the horizon. He had gone to get that vial of V1. Only after Bombsight had completely disappeared from sight did Mr. Marathon, who had been wound tight the entire time, finally let out a long breath. He had been huddled in the back the whole time, barely daring to breathe. Otherwise, if those two monsters started fighting again, it would not just be his house getting smashed to pieces. Now that one of them was gone, he finally dared to speak. Sir. Mr. Marathon's voice still carried a trace of lingering fear, but even more confusion. Why did you come looking for me? Don't tell me it was for the V1 in his hands. Benjamin shook his head. He turned his gaze to Mr. Marathon and looked at him seriously, with no hint of insincerity in his eyes. No, he said. Mainly, I came because of you. Mr. Marathon froze. Me. I want to invite you back to Vought. Benjamin said bluntly. To join the Speedster's superhuman squad. And I can also give you a chance to compete with the current captain of the Speedster Soup squad. Mr. Marathon opened his mouth, but for a moment, he had no idea what to say. Of course he had heard about Vought's reforms lately. When Edgar had been running Vought, almost all the company's resources had been poured into the 7. Second-tier soups were basically just filler, tools to patch whatever gaps were left. Nice to have, but not necessary, and never truly taken seriously. But things were different now. The new policies had begun directing a small share of resources downward. And among the resources being shifted, the ones receiving the most attention were precisely speedsters like him. They were fast, practical, and extremely useful in rescue operations, transport, emergency response, and all kinds of situations. Compared with supes who were only good at fighting, speedsters were clearly more versatile and efficient when it came to keeping a city running. Mr. Marathon had been hesitating for a while. Should he take this chance and go back? After all, he did not exactly have warm feelings for Vought. When he left back then, there had been no small amount of disillusionment mixed in. But now the wind had changed. The treatment was better, and there was room to grow. Saying he was not tempted would be bullshit. And before he could even make up his mind, Benjamin had personally shown up at his door. What did that mean? Who was Benjamin? He was someone who could walk sideways through Vought, and even the whole damn world. A big shot who could change a soup's entire future with a single sentence. And someone like that had come to find him in person and personally invited him back. Just thinking about that recognition was enough to make his chest burn. Sir. Mr. Marathon's voice trembled a little, filled with genuine gratitude from the bottom of his heart. I never thought that you valued me this much. He felt overwhelmed by the honor. Sure, he had no way of squeezing into the 7. That position was too far away. He did not even dare dream about it. But the Speedster's superhuman squad was already the top of the 2nd tier. And if he could take the captain's seat, the treatment would be almost on par with the 7. Of course, it would not be easy. The current captain of the Speedster's superhuman squad was Shockwave, someone who could go head-to-head with A-Train in speed. It was obvious how hard it would be to take the captain's position from him. But at the very least, there was hope now, wasn't there? Compared to the gray, dead-end life he used to see stretching out in front of him. Now, at least, he had a goal worth fighting for. Even if the chance was slim, it was still a chance. Benjamin reached out and patted Mr. Marathon on the shoulder. Be a proper superhero, Mr. Marathon. Benjamin said calmly, but there was an unquestionable seriousness in his voice. From now on, quit all your shitty habits. Otherwise, when you're out on superhero missions, like rushing emergency patients to the hospital when every second counts, things can go wrong real damn fast. Mr. Marathon's expression stiffened slightly. Who did not know he was an addict? After he got kicked out of the 7, he had spent his days drifting around in a daze, not giving a damn what anyone thought of him. But now things were different. If he really wanted to go back, if he really wanted to stand in front of the public as a superhero again, then under Vought's current rules, all that messy crap really did have to be cut off completely. Mr. Marathon had heard about that too. It made him nervous. Quitting those bad habits, that was no easy thing. But then he thought about it again. He could return to Vought. He could gain far more fame and money than he had at this low point, earn more respect, get a brighter future, and receive the approval of the man standing right in front of him. This was recognition from Soldier Boy himself? To Mr. Marathon, the name Soldier Boy itself was practically a belief. He was someone Mr. Marathon had grown up watching on TV, someone he had worshipped in his heart since he was a kid. Being personally invited by his idol, then having that idol pat him on the shoulder and tell him to do a good job, that carried enough weight to crush every bit of hesitation. Mr. Marathon nodded solemnly. He was deeply grateful to Soldier Boy. Benjamin withdrew his hand and turned to Rena beside him. Rena, go find Homelander and get a vial of V5 serum from him, he ordered. Tell him I asked for it. Rena lifted an eyebrow slightly, a flicker of surprise passing through her eyes. V5 serum? Right now? But she did not ask any questions. Because Master's orders were absolute. Understood, sir. Before she had even finished speaking, silver light flashed around Rena. Her body turned into a sharp streak of silver and vanished from sight. Bombsight came back even faster than he had left. A blurred afterimage dropped from the sky like a bolt, slamming straight into the ground and carving out a huge crater. Mr. Marathon's heart ached all over again as he watched the damage Bombsight had just smashed into his garden. Bombsight now had a metal box in his hand. The box looked old. Its paint was mottled and peeling, the corners were worn smooth and shiny, and even the latch had a thin layer of rust on it. No matter how you looked at it, it was just an ordinary old metal box. But Benjamin knew what was inside. V1. Bombsight landed back on the ground and, without the slightest hesitation, handed the metal box over. Take it. Benjamin took the box. It felt heavier than he had expected. He opened it and checked inside. It was a blue vial. Then he casually put it away. He knew Bombsight would not lie to him. That judgment was not based on trust. It was based on understanding. Bombsight was not exactly some shining pillar of honesty, but at the very least, he was not the type to play cheap tricks over something like this. If he had not wanted to give it up, he never would have agreed in the first place. And since he had agreed, he was not going to shove some random blue drink into the box and try to bullshit him. Let's do it, Benjamin said. Nuclear blast was his core ability, and also the hardest one for him to control precisely. The destructive energy inside him was like a captive sun. But right now, he was not trying to unleash that power and wipe everything out. He only needed to release a tiny bit of it, just enough to avoid hurting this 100-year-old man too badly. Honestly, that was a hell of a lot harder than going all out. Benjamin's chest began to glow. At first, it was only a faint glimmer, but it quickly grew brighter and turned into golden light. The golden glow fell across Bombsight's face, lighting his handsome features in shifting flashes of brightness and shadow. The light reflected in his eyes. His pupils tightened slightly, but his body did not move an inch. Rena and Mr. Marathon both took cover behind Benjamin. 3. Soon, the golden light in his chest burst outward. Even so, not even Benjamin could control it with perfect precision. Bombsight's body jolted hard. Several tiny cuts suddenly split open across his skin, and blood began to flow. When it was over, Bombsight lowered his head, touched one of his wounds, and stared at the bright red blood on his hand. He raised his hand in front of his eyes and examined it closely, rubbing it lightly between his thumb and forefinger as he felt that unfamiliar yet very real sticky texture. Then Bombsight smiled. "This is the first time I've ever seen my own blood," Bombsight said. His voice was full of surprise. A man who had lived for who knew how many years was seeing his own blood for the first time. Even Bombsight himself found it absurd the moment the words came out. Back when he had V1, he had been nearly immortal. Just then, silver light appeared beside Benjamin without warning. Rena had returned, too. There was a vial in her hand now. Inside the transparent container was a liquid that glowed with a faint, eerie blue sheen, refracting an unreal cold light under the sun. This was V5. Benjamin glanced at her from the corner of his eye, gave a slight nod, then turned his attention back to Bombsight. Bombsight was just about to leave. V1 had been destroyed, and the metal box had been handed over. The deal was done. He turned around. The wound's still seeping blood made him look a little battered, but his steps had a lightness to them, as if a heavy burden had finally been lifted. "Wait," Benjamin called after him. Bombsight stopped and looked back, confusion in his eyes. "Take this." Benjamin took the vial of V5 serum from Rena and tossed it over. Bombsight caught it on instinct. When he looked down, he froze. "Ben, what the hell is this supposed to mean?" His confusion was genuine. V1 was gone. The deal was finished. Benjamin did not owe him a damn thing. And now he was giving him V5? What was going on? Benjamin looked at him and said flatly, "V5 doesn't make you immortal. You've lost your superpowers now, and we both have plenty of enemies. With just the Golden Geisha's abilities, she won't be able to protect you." The words were blunt, even a little harsh, but they were the truth. Bombsight was silent for a few seconds. Of course he understood what Benjamin meant. After all these years, he had offended so many people that he could not even count his enemies. His biggest enemy had been Soldier Boy, standing right in front of him. Of course, by now, there was not much of a grudge left between them. Back when he had superpowers, he had not been afraid of anyone coming for him. Almost no one could beat him. But now it was different. Now he was just an ordinary person, someone who could bleed, break bones, and die. If his other enemies came knocking, what could he do? More importantly, while the Golden Geisha did have superpowers, she was nowhere near strong enough to handle everything on her own. If real trouble came, not only would he be unable to protect her, he might even become a burden instead. Benjamin had thought of that. And after handing over V1, Bombsight himself had completely overlooked it. "I understand." Bombsight looked again at the comrade standing in front of him, his eyes filled with complicated emotion. Benjamin was stronger than before, but Bombsight kept feeling that Benjamin had somehow changed from the man he used to be. Had all that torture from those damn Russians changed him? Bombsight wasn't good at expressing himself, and he sure as hell wasn't used to thanking someone who used to be his enemy. But this time, Bombsight thanked him anyway. "Thanks, Ben." After that, Bombsight looked down at the V5 in his hand. Without hesitating, he pulled off the needle cap, lined the needle up with a vein in his arm, and pushed it in steadily. The deep blue liquid slowly entered his body. The instant the serum hit his system, his whole body went rigid. With no superpowers left to cushion the impact, the rejection reaction from the V5 was especially violent. Burning pain erupted from the injection site and raced through his veins, like someone had shoved a red-hot wire straight into his bloodstream. His muscles spasmed uncontrollably, his teeth clenched hard enough to creak, veins bulged across his forehead, and cold sweat soaked through his back almost instantly. Fortunately, the agony did not last long. It was different from an ordinary person taking V5. When supes lost their superpowers and then injected V5, they could regain their superpowers with almost no risk. Besides, Bombsight had already survived the V1 experiments. The pain back then had been hundreds of times worse than this. Before long, Bombsight's body slowly relaxed. He drew in a deep breath, straightened up, and flexed his fingers. That familiar power was back. His sense of speed awakened again in his nerve endings, and the explosive force buried in his muscle memory once more filled his entire body. He had regained his original superpowers. The only thing missing was that near-cursed immortality. He had become his old self again, but he was no longer the prisoner trapped by eternal life. Bombsight could protect the Golden Geisha again. Then he raised his head and looked at Benjamin. "Ben, you really are one hell of a bastard, but I've gotta say it. Thanks for this?" Benjamin shrugged, his face slipping into an indifferent look. "I just think you're a fucking idiot. Trading a V1 that gives you immortality for a V5? No matter how you do the math, that's a shit deal." Bombsight laughed at that. He knew Benjamin said it like that, but deep down, he probably did not really mean it. That was just the kind of man he was. He could never accept someone's thanks like a normal person. He had to say something nasty and ruin the mood before he felt comfortable. "Say whatever you want, Ben." Bombsight pulled a slip of paper from his pocket and handed it over. "I'm leaving. This is my number. Call me if you need anything." Benjamin glanced down at the paper and frowned. "Call you for what? I'm not into dudes, for fuck's sake." Yeah, Soldier Boy had not changed at all. Bombsight cursed inwardly. A moment later, Benjamin took the paper and casually stuffed it into his pocket. Bombsight watched him, the corner of his mouth curving slightly, but he said nothing. The next second, his body turned into a blur, vanishing into the distance like a gust of wind before shooting up into the sky. After Bombsight left, Benjamin turned his gaze to Mr. Marathon. Mr. Marathon, what do you think? Once you've got your shit together, come to Vought. Mr. Marathon nodded. Of course, sir. I'll come to Vought tomorrow. No, I'll come tonight, as soon as I'm ready. Benjamin nodded, then climbed onto Rena's back. 2. With Benjamin on her back, Rena quickly left Los Angeles and returned to Vought. That night, Mr. Marathon arrived as promised. And Mr. Marathon was stunned by what he saw. In New York, the city that never sleeps, a massive LED screen in Times Square was looping footage of Mr. Marathon in all his glory. Fans lined both sides of the street, waving glow sticks. They were all fans who had once supported Mr. Marathon, and their screams rose and fell in waves. Mr. Marathon, this former member of the Seven, one of Vought Corporation's veteran heroes, stood beneath the spotlight and froze for a long moment. Soon, he flashed a bright, sunny smile. Although he was no longer an official member of the Seven, he still had the presence of an old-school hero, and his fan base remained huge. On top of that, he was about to join the Speedsters. The Speedsters had already been warmed up in advance, with a status second only to the Seven. With his former identity as a member of the Seven, he would still draw plenty of attention. Benjamin, or Soldier Boy, as Vought Corporation's true man in power, had naturally shown up in person to back the event. Ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome Mr. Marathon. The host's voice rang out. Mr. Marathon blurred onto the center of the stage. The event went smoothly. Mr. Marathon struck a few of his signature poses, interacted with fans, took photos, and even put on a short high-speed running display. Of course, he was nowhere near as fast as he had been in his prime. But that was enough. Regular people could not tell the difference with the naked eye anyway. It was enough to drive the crowd into a frenzy, and enough to send the topic straight to #1 on the social media trending charts. However, the real highlight of the event was not merely Mr. Marathon's return. As the event neared its end, Benjamin stepped into the center of the stage. He raised his hand, and the whole venue instantly went quiet. Today, we're not only here to welcome back an old friend, Benjamin said in a low voice. We're also here to honor history. As his words fell, the enormous curtain behind the stage slowly drew open. Lights flared, illuminating a grand row of statues. They were statues of every generation of the Seven, from the earliest founding members to the later replacements. Every single one was there. The lamplighter's statue held a lamp, his face solemn. Mr. Marathon's statue was frozen mid-sprint, every muscle line filled with power. There were also the heroes who had passed away or retired. Their statues stood there quietly, as if silently telling the story of Vought Corporation's decades of glory. And at the very center of all those statues, in the foremost position, stood the largest statue of all, Soldier Boy. The statue was nearly twice as tall as the others. Benjamin stood with his arms crossed, his shield hanging at his waist, his gaze looking down on the crowd with arrogant dominance, like a god of war. On the base of the statue, a line of large golden letters was engraved. The first, and the greatest. Standing beneath his own statue, Benjamin nodded in satisfaction. He had personally pushed for these statues to be rebuilt. From finding the right people to the design and construction, he had asked about every step himself. The lamplighter's statue had also been placed in a very visible position. Any lamplighter who knew about this, or saw it with his own eyes, probably would never set himself on fire again for the rest of his life. As for the other members of the Seven throughout history, every last one of them had a statue made, and all of them would eventually be placed inside Vought. Benjamin had done this not only to keep former teammates from feeling abandoned, but also to show the public how Vought treated its veteran heroes. Homelander stood in the crowd below the stage, watching everything unfold, though a trace of confusion was hidden deep in his eyes. He did not understand why his father would go to so much effort to build statues for these washed-up old guys, especially Mr. Marathon. What was worth making such a big deal over a sprinter who could barely run anymore? And those dead or retired ones? They had no value left, so why let them keep taking up the spotlight? But Homelander did not say any of this out loud. Although he did not really understand why his father was doing it, since it was his father's decision, there was nothing Homelander could do about it. The event finally ended amid the noise and flashing cameras. The fans reluctantly dispersed, the staff began cleaning up the venue, and the media broadcast trucks drove away one after another. Mr. Marathon's eyes were red. In his eyes, Soldier Boy was nothing short of a goddamn benefactor. From now on, he would be Soldier Boy's Deadpool? No, that was way too disloyal. Vought Tower, the Seven's conference room. Benjamin stood by the window with a bottle of whiskey in his hand, staring out at the night view and drinking straight from the bottle. Homelander walked up beside Benjamin, clearly wanting to say something. Spit it out. Benjamin noticed right away and called him on it. Homelander nodded, took a moment to choose his words, then said, I want to kick A-Train out of the Seven. Hearing that, Benjamin was a little surprised, but it made sense. After all, that was how the original story went. In the original timeline, A-Train really had been kicked out of the Seven because of his heart condition. He could not run anymore. To Vought, a speedster who could not run was just a broken tool. Throwing him away was only a matter of time. And since A-Train could not run anymore, the job of investigating the church had now fallen to the deep. And the deep? Well, everybody knew how that went. Most of the time, the guy was not exactly reliable. Benjamin just had not expected Homelander to come to him about it on his own. Maybe he was afraid Benjamin would be pissed. After all, A-Train was an old member, and he had always been fairly popular with the public. More importantly, Benjamin seemed to have been looking out for them this whole time. Homelander started explaining. He spoke a little faster than usual, obviously watching Benjamin's reaction with care. There's a reason for this, Homelander said, his tone carrying a deliberately concerned edge. A-Train's heart is in bad shape. His body can't handle the strain of running at super high speeds anymore. If we keep him in the 7 and keep sending him on high-intensity missions, sooner or later he's going to die in the field. So I'm doing this for his own good. Homelander paused there, checking Benjamin's expression. When he saw Benjamin simply staring at him without a hint of emotion, he continued. Besides, a member who could break down at any moment is a liability to the whole team's combat effectiveness. Homelander made it sound noble and reasonable, full of a leader's sense of responsibility and concern for his subordinate. Of course, maybe there really was a little concern in there. But mostly, it was business. Whether in the early part of the original series or now, Homelander had always valued the 7. A-Train not being able to run really was a problem. I agree, Benjamin said. Homelander's eyes lit up at once. Benjamin had agreed that quickly? Homelander felt a rush of excitement he could barely describe. His proposal had been approved by his father. That meant his judgment was right, and his father trusted his ability. Being acknowledged by his father felt pretty damn good. Still, Homelander did not let himself bask in that excitement for too long. He had something else to say. And there's one more thing, Homelander continued. Because of Black Noir's death, we never officially announced anything to the public from the beginning. Fans have been demanding to see Black Noir, and social media and short video platforms are already going crazy over it. So we've already chosen a new candidate for Black Noir. When the time comes, he'll play Black Noir, and we'll tell the public that Black Noir never left. That way, we can calm the fans down and keep the 7's full lineup intact. Benjamin raised an eyebrow slightly when he heard that. A second-generation Black Noir? The character from the 4th season of the original series immediately came to mind. He still remembered what that actor looked like, and what his personality was like. A chatty young man who had to wear that black uniform he could never take off, had to play a mysterious ninja who never spoke, and had Homelander putting immense pressure on him. In the end, he had been forced into silence. How did Black Noir 2 die? He had genuinely treated the Deep like a brother, opened his heart to him, and trusted him completely. But the Deep? By the later part of the original series, the once cowardly the Deep had completely changed. He had become cold, disgusting, hypocritical, and had even personally killed the only person who treated him like a brother. Sure, it was because of those fish, but the Deep had already killed Black Noir's best friend. All along, the Deep had been the one bullying Black Noir, stealing his credit, and then killing people. Of course, that was the Deep later on. The Deep right now still had at least some humanity left in him. Fine. Benjamin gave his answer just as decisively. Homelander nodded hard, and this time he could not hold back the smile on his face. Both proposals, and Dad had agreed to all of it without a single word of objection. Did that not prove Homelander's decision-making ability had earned his father's complete approval? Homelander turned and left in high spirits, his steps noticeably lighter than usual. Early the next morning, Homelander and Ashley appeared together on the 7's private floor and walked straight toward A-Train's lounge. A-Train was sitting on the sofa, holding a latte mixed with protein powder, bored out of his mind as he scrolled through his phone. The moment the door opened and Homelander and Ashley walked in, he saw the look on their faces, and his heart sank. Sir. A-Train looked at Homelander and was about to speak, but Homelander cut him off. A-Train, Homelander said, starting today, you are no longer a member of the 7. A-Train opened his mouth, wanting to say something. He wanted to defend himself, beg for another chance, remind them how much he had given to the 7 and how much glory he had brought Vought. But when he looked up into Homelander's eyes, every word got stuck in his throat. He suddenly understood. This had been inevitable all along. From the day his heart condition was discovered, this ending had already been waiting for him. For all he knew, Homelander had already cleared it with Soldier Boy. It was not that he had never prepared himself for this. He just had not expected the day to come so fast, or for it to be this ruthless. A-Train slowly stood up and set down the latte he had not finished. He did not say anything else. He simply began packing his things in silence. The fastest man in the world was now just an ordinary man with a lonely back. His career had once again plunged into a bottomless pit. And this time, he did not know whether he still had the strength to climb back out. Comment. 2 comment. Vote. 1 left. Chapter 116, Chapter 116, Arrival at Sage Grove Center. After wrapping up A-Train's situation, Benjamin didn't stay long at Vought headquarters. A-Train had already been stripped of his place in the 7. The follow-up PR statement, media response, and public opinion management were naturally Ashley's problem now. Besides, Benjamin wasn't worried that A-Train would completely fall apart. The Blue Hawk incident was coming up soon. Sooner or later, A-Train would end up with Blue Hawk's heart. 1. Sage Grove Center. A place of sin carrying decades of Vought's darkest history. The people locked up there were not ordinary patients. They were the products of secret soup experiments Vought had carried out for years, and every one of them was an adult. The problem at Sage Grove Center had to be dealt with, and the sooner, the better. Not just Sage Grove Center, either. Every secret experimental facility across the country where Vought was holding supes had to be cleaned out along with it. Those places were like time bombs buried underground, ready to blow at any moment. Some of the test subjects had completely lost their minds, yet still possessed terrifying superpowers. Some were still lucid, but after years of imprisonment, all they wanted was to go home. Every single day, they wanted home. They wanted freedom. Others did not even know who they were anymore, struggling in endless confusion and pain like wild beasts trapped in iron cages. If these people were left alone, sooner or later, something big would go wrong. A riot, a breakout, or even a test subject losing control and unconsciously unleashing their superpowers could trigger a catastrophic chain reaction. Before the boys showed up to cause trouble, Benjamin planned to make a trip there himself. His thinking was practical. For the ones who could be managed, he would see whether they could be recruited. His attitude towards supes had always been utilitarian. As long as they had power, listened to orders, and could be useful to him, it did not matter whether they used to be test subjects or street thugs. They could be given a chance. As for the ones who could not be controlled, the ones who were completely gone mentally or simply too dangerous, they would have to be handled another way. Erase their superpowers. Rather than keeping them locked behind iron doors for the rest of their lives, rotting away, it was better to turn them back into ordinary people and let them return to society. It would be a release for them, and protection for society. Before long, Benjamin arrived in front of a square, gray-white building. From the outside, it looked like an ordinary office building. But a closer look showed that every window had heavy iron bars installed, and security cameras packed the corners in dense rows. It was even more locked down than a prison. Before the car had fully stopped, a figure hurried out of the building to greet him. It was the lamplighter. Compared with his glory days in the Seven, the lamplighter now seemed calmer and more composed. The moment he saw Benjamin open the car door and step out, undisguised respect appeared in his eyes. He had also heard about Mr. Marathon's homecoming event last night, and had seen those statues standing tall again on TV. Those statues belonged to old-timers from his generation. Seeing them brought up a lot of emotion. Benjamin had not forgotten them. He had not erased their history. Instead, he had put up statues for them in grand fashion and announced their former glory to the world. The lamplighter remembered that kindness. "Mr. Soldier Boy, you're here." The lamplighter hurried forward, his tone filled with genuine respect, even dipping slightly in a bow. Benjamin nodded. Without bothering with small talk, he got straight to the point. "I'm here to deal with these test subjects." The lamplighter stiffened slightly. Deal with the test subjects? The test subjects at Sage Grove Center knew far too many of Vought's secrets. Their very existence carried the company's most shameful, hidden history. If Vought had decided to deal with them, then the most direct method was obvious. Silence them. The thought made the lamplighter's heart tighten. He hesitated for a moment, then finally worked up the courage to speak. "Sir," the lamplighter said, lowering his voice with a careful edge to it, "some of these test subjects have extremely powerful abilities. Their superpowers are high level. Used properly, they could become a serious combat force. If we just kill them all, that'd be kind of a dim waste." The lamplighter knew the experiments had been stopped, so he did not mention them. Instead, he talked about the benefits they could bring if they joined Vought in the future. He kept his words measured, but his meaning was clear. The truth was, the lamplighter had gone a little soft on them. Benjamin turned his head, glanced at the lamplighter, and shook his head. "I'm not silencing them," Benjamin said flatly. Hearing those words, the lamplighter froze. He had already prepared himself mentally, assuming Benjamin had been sent to carry out a cleanup operation. After all, with Benjamin's strength, flattening all of Sage Grove Center would not take more than a few minutes. But he never expected that Benjamin had no such plan at all. "My plan is simple." Benjamin started walking toward Sage Grove Center's main entrance, and the lamplighter hurried to keep up. "Sort the test subjects. The ones whose mental state is relatively stable and who are willing to cooperate, we evaluate whether they're worth recruiting. As for the ones who are completely broken, whose abilities are too dangerous, and who can't be controlled at all, I'm going to erase their superpowers and then let them leave." The lamplighter stopped walking. He stood there, his face frozen as if he had just heard something impossible. Erase their superpowers? Then let them leave? That was nothing like how Vought did things. Based on Vought's usual methods, these test subjects would either be locked up until they died, squeezed dry of every last bit of value, or quietly disposed of, disappearing from the world along with Vought's secrets. Let them go? Of course, there was a reason the lamplighter was so shocked. After all, he spent most of his time inside the lab. He had not been at Vought, so he only had a vague understanding of the things that had happened there recently. But his shock did not last long. Soon, he thought of another issue, a very real problem he could not help worrying about. He quickened his pace to catch up with Benjamin, his voice filled with obvious concern. "But, sir, after they get out, what if?" The lamplighter chose his words carefully. "What if they start telling everyone what happened here? Wouldn't that make Vought look bad?" Vought's public image had only just started to recover. Under Soldier Boy's leadership, the company was working hard to wash away its past stains and regain the public's trust. If these former prisoners ran out and spilled everything to the media, exposing the inhuman experiments, the years of imprisonment in total darkness, and the brutal torture they had endured, then everything Vought had worked so hard to rebuild might collapse in an instant. But Benjamin just kept walking, not even turning his head as he tossed back one sentence. The people getting dragged are the old Vought. What the fuck does that have to do with me? Why the hell are you talking so much? The lamplighter stopped again. But this time, his face no longer showed worry. Instead, it showed sudden understanding, then relief, and even a trace of genuine admiration. Right. How had he not thought of that? Vought had changed. The Vought under Soldier Boy's control was practically a completely different company from the Vought of Stan Edgar's era. Those filthy experiments, that dark history, those inhuman crimes. All of it came from Edgar's era. No matter how the blame was assigned, it could not fall on the current Vought, much less on Soldier Boy. Even if the test subjects exposed every last scandal, the public's anger would only burn toward the old Vought that had already been reduced to ashes. The new Vought could even use this chance to distance itself further from the past and draw a clean line between them. This move really was brilliant. Benjamin walked into Sage Grove Center. Heavy iron doors lined both sides of the long corridor. Through the small windows set into them, he could see the faces inside, some blank, some wild with madness. The sharp stink of disinfectant and medication hung in the air. Every now and then, low growls or hysterical screams echoed from somewhere deeper down the hall. It honestly felt a little like one of those labs where they cooked up zombie viruses. Benjamin didn't waste time. Once the test subjects had been sorted, he began opening the rooms holding the uncontrollable ones, one after another. He ignored the people inside. Each time, golden light flashed from his chest and swept over them. He deliberately kept the power of the nuclear blast under control, compressing the energy to the bare minimum, just enough to neutralize the effects of Compound V without causing real damage to the human body. Ever since the last time he used a nuclear blast on bomb site, Benjamin's control had improved again. One by one, those uncontrollable supes were turned back into ordinary people in the glow of Benjamin's nuclear blast. Some collapsed the instant their superpowers disappeared, letting out sobs that sounded like pure relief. Some stared blankly at their own hands, as if they were truly seeing the world for the first time. Others simply accepted it in silence, their eyes empty, with no way to tell whether they felt joy or sorrow. Of course, there were also some supes whose mental evaluations came back normal and who were willing to join Vought. Benjamin had them follow the lamplighter for the time being. Before long, only one test subject remained in all of Sage Grove Center. Benjamin stood in front of the last iron door at the end of the corridor and looked through the small window at the figure inside. The nameplate on the door read, Cindy. Cindy's ability was telekinesis, and it was powerful as hell. According to her file, she could twist steel into a pretzel with her mind alone and easily crush supes who were not especially strong. In terms of raw destructive power, she was absolutely near the top among all the test subjects. The problem was that her mental state was extremely unstable. You never knew what she might do next. Even the lamplighter was deeply afraid of her. From a distance, Cindy could crush him in an instant. If it had been anyone else, Benjamin probably would have erased their powers right away. But Cindy was different. Her strength was beyond question. If she could be stabilized, she would become an extremely powerful asset. Erasing her abilities just like that would be a damn shame. And in the original series, she later became one of Homelander's people, and she did not seem to do anything too far out of line. Benjamin hesitated for a moment, then opened the iron door. He wanted to talk to her. Benjamin pushed open the heavy iron door and stepped inside. The room was small. Its four walls were cold, concrete gray, and aside from a metal cot bolted to the floor, there was nothing else inside. A fluorescent tube on the ceiling cast a sickly white light, buzzing as it lit the entire room without leaving a single shadow. The air reeked of disinfectant mixed with something sour and rotten. It was the kind of smell that only came from psychiatric patients being locked in a sealed space for too long. In the center of the room, a bald woman sat cross-legged on the floor. She wore a pale blue hospital gown that had been washed nearly white, hanging loose over her thin body. The buttons at the collar were fastened wrong, exposing a stretch of unnaturally pale collarbone. There was not a single hair on her head. At first glance, she almost looked like a man. This woman was Cindy, one of the highest-rated telekinetic supes in Vought's files, and a high-risk test subject whose psychiatric evaluation report was covered in red warning labels. Hearing footsteps, Cindy slowly lifted her head. It was a gaunt face, with high cheekbones, deeply sunken eyes, and a vacant stare now fixed directly on Benjamin without blinking. Benjamin stood still and let her look him over. He had seen too many test subjects just now. Some were hysterical, some numb, some on their knees begging for mercy, and some cursing non-stop. But Cindy was different from all of them. Then Cindy opened her mouth and slowly said, "After today's moon breaks apart, soak it in porridge and drink it. I only just remembered, there's no such thing as a red sun, and mice are cats." After saying that, she closed her mouth and continued staring straight at Benjamin. Benjamin froze for a second, then nearly lost it. Yeah, her mental illness did seem pretty damn serious. Still, Benjamin did not make a final call right away. Although Cindy's mental illness was severe, her logical thinking was also sharp. In the original series, Cindy had once been accidentally released. At the time, everyone thought she would go on a killing spree. Letting a lunatic like her loose was basically lighting the fuse on a barrel of explosives. But in reality, Cindy not only did not attack the main group, she showed a surprisingly clear sense of action and logic. She directly used telekinesis to crush the iron doors of the other test subjects' rooms, releasing every imprisoned supe and setting off a riot that swept through the entire laboratory. That smooth chain of actions really did not look like something done by a person whose brain was completely broken. In other words, Cindy's psychosis was intermittent. Or rather, her psychosis and her normal logical thinking existed at the same time. Her head might be packed full of shattered moons, red suns, and rats. But that did not stop her from making the most precise call at a critical moment. Benjamin decided to test that judgment. He did not speak again or try to communicate. He had his own way, a more direct one. Soon, Benjamin took a step forward and walked up to Cindy, looking down at the small, bald woman. There was less than a step between them. Benjamin could even smell the harsh chemical stink clinging to her. Then Benjamin drove a punch down. Benjamin's punch was clean and brutal. His fist cut through the air and slammed hard into the side of Cindy's face. The impact ripped her off the floor and sent her crashing into the wall behind her. A dull boom followed, and cracks burst across the concrete with Cindy's back at the center. Her body was driven straight into the wall. Her head lolled to one side, her bald scalp covered in gray-white dust. To be honest, Benjamin had held back. Otherwise, killing Cindy with one punch would have been easy. But what could he do? Benjamin was a kind-hearted man. Benjamin drew back his fist. The next second, an invisible force surged in from every direction. It couldn't be seen or touched, but it felt like a giant unseen hand had clamped down on Benjamin's body and was trying to crush him. This was Cindy's psychic power. A psychic power strong enough to twist steel into a pretzel. If it had been an ordinary soup, their bones would probably have shattered by now, their organs rupturing under that horrific pressure until blood poured from every opening in their body. But Benjamin was no ordinary soup. He merely looked down at himself. The invisible telekinetic field was trying to squeeze his body, but his skin did not even dent. His muscles remained as hard as steel, and his bones did not move an inch. That terrifying telekinetic force, powerful enough to make a weaker soup burst apart on the spot, landed on him like a 3-year-old pounding an adult's calf with everything they had. No, not even that hard. Benjamin started walking towards Cindy, who was still embedded in the wall. When he reached her, he grabbed the back collar of her hospital gown and yanked her out of the shattered concrete like pulling a radish out of mud. Cindy hung limply in his grip. A thin line of blood seeped from the corner of her mouth, a little gift from that first punch. Her eyes were unfocused, her gaze drifting. She clearly still had not recovered from the hit. Benjamin did not give her the chance. The second punch drove into her abdomen, its force controlled with perfect precision. Not enough to kill her, but more than enough to make her question her entire damn life. Cindy's body folded violently. Then came the third punch. The fourth. Every blow landed where it would hurt the most without being fatal, steady, and unhurried. Cindy had no idea why this middle-aged man had walked in and started beating the shit out of her. Had she done something wrong? After several punches, Cindy's scattered gaze began to focus again. She became much more lucid, and the way she looked at Benjamin was filled with fear and respect. Before the beating, Cindy had looked kind of stupid. Now she seemed a lot smarter. Now, Benjamin lifted her by the collar with one hand until her eyes were level with his and said, "Can you fucking understand what I'm saying?" Cindy nodded hard. She only knew one thing. If she did not nod, the man in front of her absolutely would not mind punching her a few more times. I understand." Cindy's voice came out hoarse. Benjamin stared into her eyes for 3 seconds, as if checking whether that clarity in her gaze was real or just an act. 3 seconds later, he let go. Cindy dropped to the floor like a sack of potatoes, collapsing there and gasping for air. Sweat and blood mixed on her bald head and ran down her cheeks. Benjamin looked down at her. The corner of his mouth twitched slightly. "Good," he said. "Then now we can have a proper chat." Benjamin had no idea how Homelander had subdued Cindy in the original series, but he figured it had probably been something like this. Cindy must have feared Homelander's power, and that was why she worked for him. Unfortunately, later on, Starlight snapped her neck and killed her. Starlight was way too nasty. He would go back tonight and teach her a lesson. The conversation that followed did not last long. Benjamin was not the type to waste words. After those punches knocked her fully back to her senses, Cindy showed the same clear-headed logic she had in the original series. She still spouted nonsense every now and then, but when it came to the important questions, her answers were fairly coherent. Benjamin gave her 2 choices. First, have her superpowers erased, return to society as an ordinary person, and cut all ties with Vought from then on. Second, join Vought, become a superhero, and use her abilities in exchange for freedom, decent status, and a respectable life. Faced with the menace in Benjamin's eyes, Cindy chose the second option with almost no hesitation. And with that, Sage Grove Center's last test subject was dealt with. When Benjamin walked out through the gates of Sage Grove Center, Lamplighter followed behind him, his expression both relieved and complicated. Still, when he looked at Cindy beside them, his eyes were full of caution. As for the test subjects who had once been locked up here, the ones too difficult to control had their abilities erased and were released. Those willing to cooperate were added to an intake list, waiting for Vought's next arrangements. Sage Grove Center, a place that had carried countless dark secrets from the old Vought, officially became history today. The iron gates stood wide open. The corridors were empty. Staff would be sent in to handle the cleanup, followed by demolition and whatever else came next. "Sir, the ones we released." Lamplighter hesitated for a moment, then asked, "You sure they won't cause trouble?" Benjamin said, "If there's a fucking problem, Edgar can crawl out of his grave and explain it himself." When Benjamin returned to Vought headquarters with Cindy and Lamplighter, several executives on the administrative floor were shocked. A former member of the Seven was one thing, but a mental patient who had just been released from Sage Grove Center? She could join the second-tier supes too? But no one dared object, because Soldier Boy had personally brought them back. Then again, with her mental condition, maybe she could win support from people with psychiatric disabilities. Quite a few senior executives comforted themselves with that thought. The personnel arrangements were finalized quickly. Lamplighter was officially assigned to the second-tier supes as an elemental type. From now on, he would no longer be involved in anything related to the other experiments. The same went for Cindy. She was assigned to Blind Spot's first team as a combat type. In fact, if Kimiko's younger brother had been willing to join Vought, he and Cindy might even have ended up on the same team. Their abilities seemed pretty similar, after all, both related to psychokinesis. But Kimiko's younger brother was still screaming about killing Vought. Maybe they should just use Kimiko's younger brother to control Kimiko. For Lamplighter, being assigned to the second-tier supes was not exactly an insult. He may have once been a member of the Seven, but everyone knew his physical capabilities were only a little stronger than an ordinary person's. Maybe he could take a regular handgun round and run at the speed of a professional athlete, but that was about it. His lighter and the torch he wielded were his real weapons. Sure, his damage output was high, but he was ultimately too fragile. Right now, there was not a single member of the Seven with weak physical durability. Homelander, Maeve, and Stormfront went without saying. Then there was Black Noir too, who could tank a Gatling gun head-on, the Deep, whose physique was about on par with Black Noir eyes, and Starlight, who was tough as hell. Moving down to the second line gave Lamplighter both dignity and protection. Besides, the second-tier supes were receiving unprecedented attention and development. All kinds of second and third-tier teams were appearing in public more frequently, handling city patrols, disaster relief, and community service. All the jobs top-tier heroes could not be bothered to do were being taken over by the second-tier teams, which unexpectedly earned them a lot of goodwill from the public. Lamplighter joined at exactly the right time. With his precise control over fire, it would not be long before he became a core member of a second-tier team. As for Cindy, her position was a little more delicate. A mentally ill person becoming a superhero was sketchy no matter how you looked at it, and the PR department was miserable over it. But Benjamin did not give a damn what the PR department thought. Fortunately, the company personally evaluated Cindy. Although the bald woman did have a mental illness, it was controllable, and her logical thinking was stronger than that of most normal people. More importantly, she could actually understand what people said, tell enemies from allies, and knew when to act and when to stop. That was enough. Benjamin had already experienced the strength of her telekinesis firsthand in that small room at Sage Grove Center. That power, strong enough to twist steel into a pretzel, posed no threat to him at all. But in a street fight or against ordinary soup criminals, it was basically a one-sided stomp. That meant Cindy's overall strength could easily place her among the top ranks of the second-tier supes, maybe even above the Deep. Having her take down criminals and deal with ordinary soup offenders was more than enough. Of course, to prevent an actual psychotic episode, Cindy had to undergo a psychiatric evaluation once a week. If she failed, she would be suspended immediately and sent for treatment. Cindy had no objection to this. In fact, she was extremely cooperative. After taking those punches from Benjamin, she had become very obedient. With that, the Sage Grove Center incident came to an end. That afternoon, Black Noir 2 officially joined the Seven. Since Black Noir was still alive as far as the public knew, the news was not announced. Every handover and onboarding procedure was handled quietly in a sealed room high inside the Vought headquarters building. Benjamin summoned the young man in the black uniform directly to his windowless private office. Black Noir 2 stood in front of Benjamin, back straight, both hands pressed against his black armor. Benjamin leaned back in his chair and looked him up and down for a few seconds, then spoke with open impatience. "All right, talk. I fucking know you can." Black Noir 2 froze for a second, then quickly said, "Mr. Soldier Boy, you have no idea." He spoke fast. Very fast. "They haven't let me talk since the selection process started. They kept saying Black Noir is a silent ninja and has to keep up the mysterious persona. Sir, do you know how painful it is to not let someone talk? I've been losing my damn mind holding it in. Every day when I get back to the dorm, I talk to myself in the mirror so much that my neighbors think I'm hiding someone in my room. Sir, you're a good man. Seriously, you're the first person who's let me speak at work." As a student from Godolkin University, he had already admired Benjamin a great deal. Now he admired him even more, and once he started talking, he would not stop. "Enough." Benjamin raised a hand and cut him off. "Don't fucking overdo it." "Yes, sir. Understood, sir." Black Noir 2 shut his mouth almost instantly. Soon, Benjamin gave Black Noir 2 his assignment. The Deep was still investigating the Church of the Collective. Originally, the Deep and A-Train had been in charge of the mission together, but now that A-Train had developed heart problems and been kicked out of the Seven, someone capable had to step in and help with the investigation. Black Noir 2 was definitely capable enough, even if he was a little unreliable. Still, Benjamin considered that Black Noir had only just joined the company and still had a pile of onboarding procedures, training arrangements, and identity handoffs to deal with, so he gave him some breathing room. He told Black Noir he could finish all that miscellaneous crap first, then go meet up with the Deep. Who knew if the Deep had started slacking off by now? There had not been any new intel in a long time. Black Noir too agreed without hesitation. He gave Benjamin a deep bow, then walked out of the office with a spring in his step. Once he was outside, Black Noir too immediately went back to his cold, silent act. A few days passed in the blink of an eye. During the day, Benjamin had Rena carry him around while they wandered and enjoyed themselves. Or at night, he would discipline the utterly rotten Starlight, Stormfront, or Newman. Benjamin also occasionally made time to go out for a meal with Homelander. Honestly, Homelander was already getting a little pissed off at Starlight and Stormfront. If not for them, maybe he would have had more time with Benjamin. Vought secret community. This was where Becca and Ryan were staying. Not far from the secret community, inside an ordinary guest house, 3 men were crammed into one tiny room. The room was lit by a single dim yellow desk lamp. The curtains were drawn tight, not letting even a sliver of light leak out. The ashtray was packed with cigarette butts, and the air felt stale and oppressive. Butcher sat in a chair by the window, holding a can of beer that had already gone warm. His eyes were fixed through a gap in the curtains on the small lit building outside, his gaze dark and heavy. Butcher, Mother's Milk said from where he leaned against the corner, his lowered voice unable to hide his frustration. When the hell are we making a move? We've been here for days, watching that damn building every day, watching Homelander come and go, and we're just doing nothing. Butcher did not turn around. His eyes stayed locked on that lit window. After a long silence, he finally shook his head. His voice was rough and low. Not right now. He lifted the beer can and took a swig. The cold liquid slid down his throat, but it did nothing to put out the fire in his chest. Homelander's been coming back here a lot lately. Sometimes twice a day, sometimes for the whole damn night. We don't know when he's here or when he leaves. There's no pattern. If we go after Becca and Ryan right under his nose, how many seconds do you think all of us put together would last? Mother's Milk opened his mouth, then said nothing. He knew Butcher was right. Every one of them understood Homelander's strength. A head-on fight with him would be suicide. Then how long are we supposed to wait? Frenchie asked from the opposite corner. He was crouched on the floor, wiping down a precision instrument. The desk lamp reflected in his blue eyes, and his tone was much calmer than Mother's Milk's. Butcher turned around to face the two of them. There are supervillains all over the goddamn world right now. You really think that bastard Homelander is gonna sit at home and play dad? Don't be stupid. He crushed the empty beer can in his hand and shouted angrily, we wait for the day Homelander has to fly to the other side of the planet to clean up some other country's supervillains. That's when we move. Butcher was not stupid. If they were going to make a move, they had to pick a time when Homelander was busy. Dinner was halfway through at the Newman family dining table. It was a detached villa in an upscale residential area of New York, tastefully decorated without being too flashy. The off-white walls matched the dark walnut floors. Warm yellow light poured down from recessed ceiling lamps, wrapping the entire dining room in a cozy glow. There were 2 place settings on the table, along with a plate of grilled salmon with asparagus, a glass of white wine, and a glass of orange juice. Newman wore a beige house sweater, her hair casually pinned up behind her head, and was lifting a piece of fish to her mouth with her fork. Across from her sat her daughter, Zoe, a little girl who had inherited her mother's delicate features. She held the glass of orange juice in both hands. She took small sips, glancing at her mother from time to time as if she was hesitating over whether to say something. This night was just like every night before they moved. Quiet and orderly. Mother and daughter had only each other. Ever since divorcing Samir, Newman had brought Zoe here. It was still New York, but it was a fair distance from where they had lived before. She had done this to show Soldier Boy that she was starting over. It was also meant to reassure Soldier Boy. After all, she had been willing to move, willing to be Soldier Boy's canary, willing to cut herself off completely from her past. Soon, there was a knock at the door. Newman's fork stopped in midair. Her brows furrowed slightly, and her eyes sharpened in an instant. It was the instinct she had developed after years of fighting her way through politics. At this hour, no one had an appointment to visit. And that man had not said he was coming to see her. She did not get up right away. Instead, she tilted her head slightly and listened. The knock came again, a little more urgent this time. Mom. Zoe set down her orange juice and looked at her mother in confusion. Stay here. Don't move. Newman set down her fork, wiped the corner of her mouth with a napkin, stood, stretched slightly, and turned toward the door. Her movements were calm and unhurried, but every step toward the door carried a subtle edge of caution. Her hand paused on the doorknob for 1 second before she turned it. The door opened. A man stood outside. He wore a wrinkled dark blue jacket over a gray t-shirt with a stretched-out collar. His chin was covered in several days' worth of bluish-gray stubble, his eye sockets were sunken, and his cheekbones jutted sharply. He looked as if something had hollowed him out from the inside, so haggard he was almost unrecognizable. But of course Newman recognized him. Samir. Her ex-husband. They stared at each other across the threshold, less than a meter apart, yet it felt as if an uncrossable gulf lay between them. The cold night wind swept in from outside, stirring a few loose strands of hair at Newman's temples. She instinctively pulled her sweater a little tighter around herself. Not because the wind was that cold, but because this sudden meeting made her need a second to steady her breathing. Why are you here? Newman folded her arms across her chest. Her voice was icy, but if you listened closely, there was the faintest tremor hidden beneath that cold, hard surface. At the sight of Samir, a dull pain spread through her chest, but her expression did not soften at all. Newman's heart hurt. It was the truth, whether she wanted to admit it or not. Divorce had never been what she wanted. When she made that decision, her heart had broken, but there was no other choice. No way back. I came to see you. I came to see my daughter. Samir's voice was low. His gaze passed over Newman's shoulder and toward the dining room. Through the half-open door, he saw Zoe sitting at the table. The little girl had turned her head to look this way, her eyes exactly like Newman's, filled with complicated emotion. If you don't want to die, I suggest you get the hell out. Newman ignored his gaze and spoke coldly. Her threat made Samir sway, as if her words had slapped him hard across the face. His Adam's apple bobbed. His lips trembled a few times before he finally spoke, his voice shaking. Newman, after all these years together, all these years, are you really just going to throw it all away? As he said it, a thin sheen of tears gathered in his eyes. It didn't look like an act. At least, not completely. This was nearly 10 years of marriage, after all. Newman did not answer. She only stared coldly at Samir. Zoe kept looking at Samir with that same complicated expression. She was still young, but girls matured early, and from everything that had happened these past few days, she had already pieced together a rough idea. She knew her mom and dad were divorced. She knew her dad had left their home. She knew her mom had told her it was all her dad's fault. Yes, Newman had told Zoe that all of this was Samir's fault. She told Zoe that her father had done a lot of bad things, that he had hurt her mother and betrayed their family. She had even, intentionally or not, revealed some of Samir's dirty laundry, shaping him into the image of a father who was not worth respecting or missing. That had never been what Newman wanted, but she had to do it. She needed a reason. A good enough reason to make Zoe stop missing the father she used to know. To be fair, not everything Newman said was a lie. Samir had cheated. More than once. 1. The old Newman had never cared all that much about it. After all, in America, especially in their circle, attitudes toward sex were nowhere near rigid enough for 1 or 2 affairs to end in divorce. 1. Turning a blind eye, maintaining the respectable shell of a marriage, and continuing on while each side got what they needed. That was the most common way things worked in their class. But now it was different. Everything had changed. Because Newman was now Soldier Boy's woman. And Soldier Boy cared about things like that. That was the key. 1. She already belonged to Benjamin. Her status had fundamentally changed. Cheating had once been a small thing Newman barely gave a damn about. Now, it had become the most convenient knife in her hand. Of course, it still counted as an excuse. 1. Feelings, throw it away. Newman finally spoke. The tremor in her voice was gone, replaced by sarcasm. She let out a cold snort, her eyes fixed on Samir's haggard face. Don't make me laugh. I was young and stupid, and somehow I picked you. Edgar was right. You married me because you wanted my platform. You dated me because you thought you could use me. Dream on. Now you've lost your job, and you're not even good enough for me anymore. So get the fuck out. Samir's expression changed instantly. You, is that why? Samir pressed her, anxiety creeping into his voice. Newman did not give him a chance to breathe. She tilted her head slightly and went on in the same unhurried tone. And that's not all. There's also the record of you cheating a while back. You want me to pull it up for you? You want me to fucking remind you of that woman's name and which hotel room she stayed in? Samir's face changed again. He instinctively took half a step back. He had never imagined Newman would confront him with something like this. Cheating? Did she actually care about that? Back then, she had clearly always looked the other way. She had never wasted her breath on things like this. What did that kind of thing even count for in American high society? 1. Who the hell divorced their husband at light speed just because he slept with another woman? It was absurd. No, it definitely was not that simple. Samir's mind cleared a little. Standing on the porch in the cold wind, he stared at Newman's ice-cold face. There was no way Newman had divorced him just because he had used her a little. If she had cared about that, she would have said something years ago instead of waiting until now. And there was no way it was just because of some affair, either. She did not care about any of that. She had never cared. True, he no longer had his job at Vought, but with his abilities, he could easily find another high-paying position somewhere else. So that probably was not the reason either. Why the hell are you still here? Newman's voice suddenly rose, cutting off his thoughts. She narrowed her eyes. A trace of white appeared in her pupils, the sign of her superpowers. You want me to pop your head and splatter your blood all over the place? Samir's face went completely white. He knew Newman's abilities. Honestly, Samir understood better than anyone how terrifying this woman was. In front of those big, beautiful eyes, a person's life or death really did come down to a single thought. He clenched his molars hard, his face shifting between livid and pale. In the end, his survival instinct overpowered every other emotion. He said nothing else, turned sharply, and left. The door slammed shut. Newman leaned against it, her eyes closed. In the dining room, Zoe sat quietly in her chair, holding the glass of orange juice that had already gone cold. The warm yellow light above the table reflected in her large eyes. 1. Mom, don't be sad. You still have me, Mom. Zoe called out to her. Hearing her daughter's voice, Newman took a deep breath, steadied herself, and walked back to the dining table. She picked up her fork and continued eating the piece of grilled salmon that had already gone cold. Her movements were calm and composed, as if nothing had happened. Outside the door, the night was heavy and dark. Samir stumbled out of the upscale residential area. Cold wind poured into his open collar, making him shiver. But his mind was growing clearer and clearer, clear to an almost cold-blooded degree. He had to figure it out. Why had Newman divorced him? There had to be a real reason behind all of this. Newman should have still loved him. So what exactly had made her harden her heart, turn on him so ruthlessly in such a short time, and rip him out of her life by the roots? What did she really care about? It was another afternoon. Samir sat alone in the corner of a cheap fast food place on a New York street, a cup of black coffee long gone cold in front of him. Several crumpled sticky notes were spread across the greasy tabletop, covered in messy, crossed-out guesses. He had been sitting there all afternoon. He had refilled his coffee 3 times. And still, he had no answers. Could it be Zoe? The thought came to him quickly. Yes, Zoe. The deepest bond between him and Newman was not their 10-year marriage, and it was not all the ups and downs they had gone through together. It was Zoe. That little girl was everything to Newman. Her life. The first thing she thought of when she opened her eyes in the morning, and the last thing on her mind before she closed them at night. If there was one thing Newman would never compromise on, it was Zoe's safety. A terrifying possibility began to take shape in his mind. Was Zoe in danger? Was some unstoppable threat closing in on their daughter, forcing Newman to divorce him and cut him out of their lives completely so she could protect Zoe, and herself along with her? If that was the case, then everything made sense. If all of this was for Zoe, then it all made perfect sense. Samir's breathing grew rapid. But soon, he shook his head. No, that logic did not hold up. Who was Newman? She was Victoria Newman, a member of Congress, one of the most powerful women in the country, and a supe who could make anyone explode on the spot with a single glare. She was a walking ultimate weapon. She did not need to be afraid of anything. If Zoe was really in danger, if anyone or any force dared to threaten Zoe, then the most reasonable thing for Newman to do would be to use every ability and resource she had to wipe out that threat, not push him away. Samir might be a top biologist, but when it came to protecting their daughter, what he could do was nothing compared to Newman. Abandoning a daughter's father to save the daughter? That logic did not just fail. It was ridiculous. Was there some even stronger being threatening Zoe and Newman? Troubled, he crumpled the sticky note into a ball, tossed it into the ashtray already piled with paper balls, then irritably gulped down a mouthful of cold coffee. The bitter liquid hit his taste buds, but it did nothing for the anxiety clawing harder and harder at his heart. Over the next few days, Samir tried to investigate Newman's movements. He tried to find any old acquaintance who might know the inside story. He tried to dig even the tiniest bit of information out of Vought. But every road led to a dead end. Newman had blocked his number, and her social circle had shut him out completely. As for the Vought employees who had once bowed and scraped whenever they saw him, now they treated him like a walking disease. They either turned and left the moment they saw him, or asked him to leave with polite, icy smiles. All because he had been fired from Vought. Once, he had been Stan Edgar's most trusted right-hand man. He had been a top expert in Vaught's biological research division, a core member of the Advanced Compound V research team. That had been Samir's job. Samir's laboratory access had been among the highest in the entire company. But that was all in the past. After Edgar's fall, the old Vought management was completely purged by Soldier Boy and Homelander, and of course, Samir had been swept up in it too. One termination notice, all access revoked. He had been kicked straight out of the clouds and back down to earth. Now he had nothing. No job, no connections, and no family. His bank balance was shrinking every day, and fewer people in his contacts would even pick up his calls. Samir was even starting to wonder how many more cups of coffee he could afford in this fast food place. After all, most of the money he had earned had gone to Newman. Just as that thought surfaced, a black 4-door sedan pulled up silently outside the restaurant. It was an unmarked car, its body smooth as a mirror, without so much as a logo. A man in a black suit got out from the driver's seat. He was of average build, his hair combed perfectly into place, his face completely expressionless. The man pushed open the glass door of the fast food place and walked straight toward Samir's corner. He stopped in front of Samir's table, leaned down slightly, and said in a voice so low only the two of them could hear, "If you want to know why your wife abandoned you, come with me. I'm not here to hurt you. My boss wants to help." Samir went stiff. He looked up and stared at the unfamiliar man in black, his pupils tightening slightly. He was not stupid. A stranger getting out of an unmarked car in the dark and inviting a desperate man to get in that kind of tone, reeked of danger from every angle. The other party might not have good intentions, but Samir had nowhere left to go. After days of investigating, he had not found a single useful lead. He had no idea where to turn next. And now, someone who knew the answer he wanted had appeared right in front of him. Whether the man meant well or meant harm, whether the back seat of that black sedan led to the truth or a trap, Samir had no choice left. He stood up. He did not ask who the man was. He did not ask where they were going. Samir only nodded and followed him. The man in black turned and headed outside, with Samir close behind. He opened the rear door of the black sedan, bent down, and got in. The door shut, and the black sedan slipped silently into traffic. Late that night, the black sedan moved like a silent fish into a forgotten industrial district on the outskirts of Washington. Outside the window, the city lights gradually fell behind them, replaced by rows of rust-covered abandoned factories and smokestacks that had long since stopped working. The road was uneven and full of potholes. A pale, cold crescent moon reflected in the puddles. The sedan finally stopped in front of an abandoned warehouse. It was a dull gray concrete building. The door opened, and Samir was led out of the car by the expressionless man in black. Feeling the night wind, Samir instinctively hunched his shoulders and followed the man in black through the warehouse doors. The inside of the warehouse was nothing like he had imagined. It had clearly been renovated. The outside was run down, but the interior was clean and orderly. Several high-powered industrial lights lit the entire space as bright as day. A few pieces of laboratory equipment stood neatly along the walls, their screens flickering with dense streams of data. But what truly stunned him were the two people standing in the center of the warehouse. At that moment, an imposing older woman stood before him, looking about 60. Her short silver-gray hair was combed perfectly into place, and she wore a sharply tailored dark outfit. She stood ramrod straight, like an old pine. In her hand was a tablet. Her gaze was sharp and steady, and everything about her carried the hard edge of someone with a military background. Beside her stood a handsome middle-aged man. He wore a refined dark suit, his hair carefully styled. His features were deep-set but mild, and a faint smile hovered on his lips. Around the warehouse stood 6 or 7 security guards in black uniforms. Every one of them was stone-faced, their waists bulging enough to make it obvious they were armed. Samir stood in the middle of the warehouse, staring at the scene in front of him, his mind struggling to catch up. He had thought he would be taken to some dark basement to meet 1 or 2 shady informants. But this was clearly a well-organized operation. Who the hell were these people? And why were they looking for him? Let me introduce myself. The older woman spoke first. Her voice was calm and forceful, carrying the authority of someone used to giving orders. My name is Mallory. After introducing herself, she paused, then raised a hand and pointed to the handsome middle-aged man beside her. This is Adana, president of the Church of the Collective. He has a great deal of dirt on Vought. Samir's eyes widened slightly. Colonel Mallory. He had heard the name before, though he had never met her. She was a former senior CIA official who had once overseen supe affairs, and she had a strong reputation in both intelligence circles and the military. As for the Church of the Collective, that seemed to be some kind of cult. How had these two sides suddenly joined forces? And more importantly, what did it mean that they had come together to find him? His heart lurched. You know why Newman abandoned me. Samir's voice was urgent. He did not care about pleasantries or small talk. He just wanted an answer. Of course. Mallory's answer was blunt. She took 2 steps forward, turned the tablet around, and held it out in front of Samir. The screen was lit, showing a photograph. It was a still from a security camera. It had been taken outside the entrance of a luxury hotel. The lighting was bright, and the image was clear. In the photo, a man and a woman were walking arm in arm out through the hotel's revolving doors. The woman wore a finely tailored dark dress, her hair pinned up in an elegant bun, with a smile on her face that Samir knew far too well. It was Newman, his wife, the mother of his daughter, and the man whose arm she held was tall and powerfully built, wearing a dark coat. His stride was steady and confident. Even in a surveillance still, the pressure rolling off him was impossible to miss. It was Soldier Boy. The two of them looked intimate and natural together. Newman's body leaned slightly toward Soldier Boy, and the way she held his arm was full of attachment and trust. The smile on Newman's face was not a politician's practiced fake grin for the cameras. It was genuine, from the heart. And the background behind them, the sign of that luxury hotel and its revolving doors, said everything. A man and a woman walking out of a hotel arm in arm late at night. The image needed no explanation. Samir's fingers clamped around the edge of the tablet. His lips trembled a few times before he said, That's Soldier Boy, and my Newman. Samir. Adana spoke from the side with a pleasant smile. His voice was gentle and magnetic, but his words hit like a knife. Let me correct you. That isn't your Newman. She's Soldier Boy's now. Samir snapped his head up and stared at Adana, his eyes bloodshot. Then his gaze went blank. His wife, Newman, had cheated on him. But the affair itself was not what confused him most. In America, that kind of thing was far too common. So if it was just cheating, Samir did not care at all. What he truly could not understand was something else. His brow was tightly furrowed, and his haggard face was filled with confusion. He said, But why? Why would Newman abandon me? They just slept together once, didn't they? She's divorcing me just because of that. There was even a trace of innocence in his voice when he said it. In his worldview, an affair and a divorce did not naturally go hand in hand. A man and a woman sleeping together was, in their circle, nothing more than a harmless little fling. Who would blow up a 10-year marriage and tear apart a whole family over something that small? Newman did not care about that kind of thing. She never had, even when he did it himself. So why this time? Why did she not only care, but care enough to divorce him at damn near light speed? Mallory looked into Samir's bewildered eyes, and the corner of her mouth twitched slightly. The truth was, she did not really understand it either. Logically, Soldier Boy definitely would not care, which meant the one who cared was Newman. Maybe Newman fell in love with Soldier Boy, who knows? As far as I know, Soldier Boy has always been a womanizer. The number of women he's been involved with, across all types, is probably impossible to count. And for a smart, forceful woman like Newman to be drawn to him, then cling to him for support, that's hardly strange. At this point, Mallory's voice suddenly faltered for a moment. An old image flashed through her mind against her will. The smoke over the battlefield in Nicaragua. The young men in uniform. Gunfire and blood. And Soldier Boy's cynical face. She suddenly remembered that, back when they had first been on the battlefield in Nicaragua, that bastard had flirted with her too, hadn't he? That must have been decades ago. She had still been young then, and he had been wearing that sleazy helmet, saying filthy little things to her around camp in that careless tone of his. At the time, Mallory had only thought he was an irritating playboy, and that helmet really had been ugly as hell. Sleazy, too. But when Mallory looked back on it now, that memory, soaked through by the years, had become complicated. Her feelings toward Soldier Boy had never been simple. The man was an asshole. There was no question about that. Soldier Boy was arrogant, a womanizer, domineering, and he looked down on everyone. But on the battlefield in Nicaragua, he had also been the only supe who fought alongside her against their enemies. Back then, Soldier Boy had really put in the work. He had shed blood. He had been her ally, a reliable gun on the battlefield. And then what happened? Soldier Boy was betrayed by the other members of Payback, stabbed in the back by his own people, and shipped off to a Soviet lab to be tortured for 40 whole years. Only now did Mallory truly understand what Soldier Boy had gone through. He had been the victim of that filthy deal, a discarded pawn abandoned by his own side. A man she hated, but who was also strangely straightforward. And what Soldier Boy had done after returning to Vought surprised Mallory even more. He really did seem to want to transform Vought, to gradually turn that old, filthy company, rotten to the core and soaked in blood, into something more like a proper superhero company. The Vought under his control seemed different from Vought under Edgar. It had changed. Those things were right in front of her. She could not pretend she did not see them. Even if Mallory hated Vought. That was why her feelings towards Soldier Boy were so damn complicated. No matter how much of an asshole he was still the most normal supe she had ever seen in her life. A supe who knew what a line was, what rules were, and who had already done his best not to slaughter innocent people. Of course, Mother's Milk's family was the exception. 1. In a world full of twisted supes, that almost counted as a rare virtue. But for now, all those complicated feelings had to be shoved aside. Mallory pushed the thoughts out of her mind and focused again on the matter in front of her. Mallory's position had not changed one bit. She still intended to go after Homelander, Soldier Boy, and Vought. No matter what Soldier Boy had done, he was still the one in power at Vought, still standing in a position that needed to be checked. And what Mallory wanted to do was destroy Homelander and Vought completely. No matter how much Soldier Boy tried to reform Vought, Mallory would never believe Vought could truly change. Because the rot inside certain supes could not be changed at all. Combine that with Newman's behavior at the hearing, Mallory said, pulling her thoughts back and continuing her analysis in a calm, firm voice, and it's enough to see that Soldier Boy first went to Newman because he wanted her to help Homelander, to give Vought more political room to maneuver. But somewhere along the way, the two of them got tangled up. Newman fell for Soldier Boy, so she abandoned you. That's the whole reason. She paused, then added, of course, there's another possibility we can't rule out. Newman may think Soldier Boy and Homelander can give her a higher position in politics. After all, for some politicians, love and self-interest are basically the same damn thing. And now that Vought has fired you, you've lost everything. Newman may very well have decided to dump you. Mallory's analysis was clear and methodical, each conclusion linking neatly to the next. It sounded airtight. But what she did not know was that there were still things she did not know. For example, at this very moment, Mallory still had no idea who Newman really was. She did not know that the woman sitting among the lawmakers at the hearing was not an ordinary human. She did not know that Newman herself was a supe with terrifying superpowers, the head popper who could make anyone's skull burst while chatting like nothing had happened. According to the intelligence Mallory had, Newman was just a politician, a sharp, capable congresswoman, and an ally who had once stood on the anti-Homelander, anti-Vought front. They were supposed to be on the same side. But now that card had been taken by Soldier Boy, and only Mallory herself knew how bitter that felt. Samir said nothing. He stood there, his hands hanging weakly at his sides. Mallory had already taken the tablet back, but his hands were still curled as if he were gripping something, as if there were still anything left for him to hold on to. His eyes were empty and lost, and he gave a murmur so low it was barely audible. That goddamn Soldier Boy. His voice was hoarse and shaking. He's the strongest supe in the world, even Homelander is his son. Samir lifted his head and looked at Mallory in despair. Mallory looked at the hopelessness written all over Samir's face and knew the time had come. She handed the tablet to the aide behind her, clasped her hands behind her back, and stood in front of Samir with the steady posture of a soldier. So our goal is to take out these goddamn supes and take down Vought. The world would be better off without Vought. Mallory paused, her gaze sweeping across Samir's face to make sure he was listening, then continued, you were a researcher at Vought. You're talented. When it comes to deep development of Compound V, there are only a handful of people in all of Vought who could reach your position. What I value is your brain. The knowledge and data about Vought inside that head of yours. I want you to join our team. Samir did not speak. He only listened in silence. The warehouse's industrial lights reflected in his bloodshot eyes, flickering unsteadily. Mallory did not rush him. Instead, she began laying out her hand piece by piece. She knew that if she wanted a former Vought executive to defect, stirring up his emotions would not be enough. She had to show him what her side could bring to the table. I'm with the boys, she said. Her voice was not loud, but every word carried weight. You may not have heard the name, but we've been dealing with Vought longer than any organization out there. We've killed plenty of supes, including Translucent. And Adana, president of the Church of the Collective, is standing right in front of you. The church has multiple eyes inside Vought and a hell of a lot of dirt on the company. We're not a few strays hiding in a corner plotting a rebellion. We have strength, intelligence, and resources. Colonel Mallory deliberately paused, giving Samir time to digest it, then continued, I need you to give us dirt on Vought under Soldier Boy's control. But honestly, you probably don't have any. You were purged before this round of power changed hands, so you wouldn't have access to the new Vaught's internal secrets. I know that. If you do have something, great. If not, it doesn't matter, because your real value isn't intelligence. Wait, Samir said, lifting his head. A trace of clarity finally appeared in his eyes. He cut Mallory off, as if trying to confirm what he had heard. So your goal is to take down Vought? And Homelander and Soldier Boy? Mallory nodded. Then if I don't have any dirt on the new Vought, what can I do? Samir asked. He was thinking about where he fit on this board. He understood his situation. A former executive who had been kicked out of the game. An unemployed man whose bank balance was shrinking fast. A loser who could not even break into his ex-wife's social circle. What value could possibly have? The corner of Mallory's mouth lifted slightly in a brief, knowing smile. That was the exact question she had been waiting for. As a researcher, you were once highly valued by Edgar. That experience alone makes you useful. And you understand Vaught's experiments. Compound V, their R&D process, their technical weaknesses. In someone else's hands, that knowledge might be worthless. In ours, it could become a weapon. She took a step forward, lowered her voice, and said, for example, a weapon that can suppress supes, maybe even kill them. You're an expert in that field, aren't you? And if I remember right, you know biology pretty damn well too. Could you develop a biological weapon capable of killing Homelander or Soldier Boy? A virus, for instance. Samir's heartbeat sped up. A weapon that could suppress or kill supes. Or a virus. The more Samir heard, the more alarmed he became. These people weren't just talking shit. They were serious. They had organization, intelligence, resources, equipment, clear targets, and a concrete plan of action. They weren't trying to take down some single supe. They were going after Vought Corporation itself. Soldier Boy included. Homelander included. That massive monster controlling the most powerful supe force in the world included. These people had balls. So much that even he, someone who had once worked in Vaught's most central department, felt his scalp prickle. After what Vought did to you, after the way Soldier Boy humiliated you, Mallory said, seeing that Samir was still hesitating. Her voice suddenly turned cold. You're telling me you don't want revenge. She gave him no room to breathe and pressed harder. And then there's Newman. Newman is on Vaught's side now. She's clearly chosen Vaught's camp and is meddling in this country's political affairs on Vaught's behalf. You used to be part of Vought. You know better than anyone what it means when a supe corporation sticks its hand into Congress. That is a terrifying fucking thing. Supes cannot be allowed to rule this country, or everything goes to hell. Your daughter, Zoe. What kind of world is she going to grow up in? A world ruled by supes, or a normal one? That choice is in your hands now. Samir's Adam's apple bobbed. Mallory had brought up Zoe, and that struck exactly where it hurt. His daughter's young face flashed through his mind, along with those eyes that looked exactly like Newman's. If Newman had really thrown herself completely behind Vought, if Soldier Boy and Homelander were truly using Newman to manipulate Congress, then what would become of Zoe? Even if they never actually did it, they still had the power to. Would Newman eventually become a piece in Vought Corporation's political game? Would those lunatics use her as a tool? He wavered, his expression shifting again and again under the light. Fear and anger fought inside him, while reason and impulse pulled him in opposite directions. He wasn't someone like Butcher. He didn't have that vicious streak, that willingness to risk everything and damn the consequences. He was just a researcher. Seeing that, a flicker of unmistakable disappointment passed through Mallory's eyes. She couldn't help comparing Samir to Butcher in her mind. Their situations were too similar. Butcher's wife, Becca, had been taken away by Homelander, and Samir's wife, Newman, had been taken away by Soldier Boy. The same experience, the same betrayal, the same loss of the thing they cherished most to a supe. But how had Butcher reacted? He would risk his life just to go after Homelander. And Samir? He was standing there, unable to make up his damn mind. The gap between them was simply too wide. Mallory sighed inwardly, but she didn't let that disappointment show on her face. Disappointment was one thing. Samir's professional value was still irreplaceable. She needed the knowledge inside Samir's head. As for his courage, that could be built up over time. Or rather, someone else could make up for what he lacked. Samir's final answer did not leave Mallory disappointed for long. He stayed silent for a full 2 minutes. Then he raised his bloodshot eyes, looked at Mallory, nodded, and said, I understand. Then Samir added, but I can't put myself in danger. I'm just an ordinary researcher. I'm not a supe, and I don't know how to fight. I don't want to die. My daughter still needs me. Relax, Mallory said, a faint, meaningful smile appearing on her face. I won't put you in danger. And besides, you won't be acting alone. There's someone you're going to like. His name is Frenchie. You're both good at using your heads. Maybe the two of you can give me a few surprises. Samir made no comment on that arrangement. Then he took a deep breath, as if he had made up his mind, and said, "You said Newman is interfering in national politics on Vought's behalf. You said that was terrifying." Mallory raised an eyebrow slightly and looked at him, waiting for the rest. "You're not wrong," Samir said, his voice steadier now. "Vought started infiltrating national politics a long time ago. Very, very early. Much earlier than you imagine." "What do you mean?" Mallory's brows drew together, her gaze sharpening in an instant. She knew Vought had always wanted to get into the military. Back when Edgar and Madeline controlled Vought, that had already been true. Samir lifted his head, looked Mallory straight in the eyes, and said, "Because from beginning to end, Newman has always been an undercover agent planted by Vought in the National Assembly. She's a supe, and her adoptive father is Stan Edgar." Mallory's pupils suddenly contracted.